My name is Emma Prescott. This happened in April of 2024, though sometimes I still wake up unsure of when, or even who, I really am. The Superstition Mountains had always called to me, their jagged peaks rising from the Arizona desert like ancient sentinels. I'd photographed wildlife across 3 continents, but something about this place felt different, sacred and forbidden all at once. Maybe that's why I chose it for our trip. After my sister Claire's suicide 3 months prior, I needed something to focus my lens on besides grief. "You sure about this trail?" Jake asked, squinting at the map spread across the hood of his Jeep. My boyfriend of 2 years was handsome in that rugged, outdoorsy way, all broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin. "Reeves Ranch is pretty remote, no cell service for days." "That's the point," I said, adjusting my camera strap. 5 days away from everything, just us, nature, and hopefully some elusive wildlife. I didn't mention the real reason, that Claire had texted me about voices in her head the night she died, and somehow the isolation felt like penance. Tyler slammed the trunk shut. "Man, I'm already regretting letting you talk me into this." He was Jake's friend from college, a walking contradiction of designer outdoor gear and complete wilderness inexperience. His girlfriend Cassidy was opposite, the type who ran ultramarathons for fun and packed her backpack with military precision. "You'll be fine," Cassidy said, playfully shoving him. "Just stay behind me and try not to get eaten by a mountain lion." Megan, my best friend since college, was busy applying another layer of sunscreen. "I printed those Reeves Ranch ghost stories," she said, waggling her eyebrows. "Figured we could read them around the campfire." Megan was into crystals and tarot and had an uncanny ability to find cell service in dead zones. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest as I hoisted my pack. 5 people, 5 days, simple, healing, safe. God, I was wrong. The first day went smoothly. A long, hot hike through winding canyon trails, the spring desert in rare bloom after recent rains. We set up camp near a trickling stream, and I managed to photograph a gray fox at dusk. That night, huddled around the campfire, Megan pulled out her printouts. "The Superstition Mountains have more disappearances per square mile than almost anywhere in the country," she read dramatically. "Apache legends speak of creatures called skinwalkers, witches who can take the form of animals or people." Tyler snorted. "Yeah, because it couldn't possibly be the extreme terrain, flash floods, or lack of water that kills people." "The Apache believed this area was sacred," Megan continued, undeterred. "They warned the Spanish settlers about evil spirits that could mimic human voices to lure people away from safety." Jake slipped his arm around me. "Hear that, Em? Don't follow any mysterious voices." I laughed, but something about the stories made my skin prickle. I'm more worried about scorpions in my boots than ancient spirits. But that night I dreamed of Claire whispering my name from just beyond the campfire's light. The second day is when things started to go wrong. We were following the trail to Fish Creek Canyon when Jake frowned at his GPS. "This can't be right. It says we're 2 miles east of where we should be." Cassidy pulled out her own device. "Mine says we're right on track." "The trail's right here," I said, pointing to the clear path ahead. Tyler shrugged. "Technology, man. Can't trust it out here." We pressed on, but an hour later the trail seemed to vanish, leaving us in a sea of scrub brush and cacti. The landmark mesa I'd been using for orientation now somehow seemed to be behind us instead of to the west. "We're going in circles," Megan said, her voice tight. "That's impossible," Jake insisted. "I've been following the trail markers." But when we tried to backtrack, the markers seemed to disappear. The sun was beginning to set when the sky darkened suddenly, unnaturally fast. "Storm coming," Cassidy said, pointing to clouds rolling in from nowhere. "We need shelter." As if on cue, a voice called from a nearby rise. "You folks lost." An elderly Native American woman stood watching us, leaning on a gnarled walking stick. Her face was a map of wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and black as obsidian. "Just a bit turned around," Jake answered, clearly relieved to see another person. She introduced herself as Martha Redwater. "Flash floods coming soon. My place is just over the ridge if you need somewhere dry." We followed her to a small cabin nestled against a cliff face. It was simple but sturdy. One main room with a wood stove, shelves lined with glass jars of herbs and dried plants, and walls decorated with intricate woven patterns. "I collect plants," she explained, seeing my interest in her jars. "Medicine from the old ways. You can stay until the storm passes." The rain hit like a fury, sheets of water turning the ground outside to mud within minutes. Martha made us tea that tasted of sage and something bitter I couldn't place. As the storm raged, she told us she'd lived alone in these mountains for 40 years. "My people knew this land has power," she said, her fingers tracing patterns on the wooden table. "It remembers, holds on to things." "Like what kinds of things?" Megan asked, leaning forward. Martha's eyes fixed on her with unnerving intensity. Pain, fear, hunger. Her gaze shifted to me. Loss. I felt exposed, as if she could see Claire's absence like a hole in my chest. That night, we spread our sleeping bags on Martha's floor. I fell asleep to the sound of rain and woke to Megan shaking me urgently. "Emma, wake up. Jake's gone." Everyone else was awake, looking worried. Martha sat calmly by her stove, stirring something in a pot. "He probably just went to check on the weather," I said, but anxiety fluttered in my stomach. Tyler already had his boots on. "I'll go look." "No need," Martha said without turning. "He'll be back." An hour later, Jake returned, soaking wet despite the fact that the rain had stopped hours ago. His eyes were wide, movements jerky. "Got lost," he mumbled. "Trails all look the same in the dark." "You scared us," I said, hugging him. His skin was ice cold and he didn't hug me back. Martha insisted we stay another night since the trails would be washed out. No one argued. That afternoon, I ventured out to photograph the desert after rain. The air was clean and sharp, cacti glistening with droplets. I climbed a small rise for a better view and noticed something odd. A circle of stones partially hidden by brush, arranged in a pattern similar to the weavings in Martha's cabin. As I framed the shot, movement caught my eye. Through my telephoto lens, I saw Megan walking into a narrow ravine, following something. A coyote, maybe? I called her name, but she didn't turn. When I lowered my camera, I couldn't see her anymore. By the time I returned to the cabin, the sun was setting. "Has anyone seen Megan?" I asked. "She went looking for cell service," Cassidy said. "Something about checking work emails." We called for her as darkness fell. Just as we were about to organize a search party, she appeared at the edge of the clearing, face blank. "Sorry," she said, voice flat. "I found a good spot for reception. Got distracted." "For 3 hours?" I asked. She smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "Time flies when you're scrolling social media." That night I woke to whispering. At first I thought it was the wind, but it had words. Indistinct, but rhythmic. I sat up to see Martha standing over Megan's sleeping form, murmuring something in a language I didn't recognize. When I shifted, she melted into the shadows. In the morning, I tried to tell Jake, but he seemed distracted, irritable. "You were dreaming," he said dismissively. "I'm more concerned about getting back on track. We've lost 2 days already." "I know what I saw," I insisted. "Like you knew what you saw the night before Claire died?" he snapped, then immediately looked regretful. "Em, I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" But the damage was done. I told Jake how I dreamed of Claire drowning the night she took all those pills, how I'd ignored it as just a nightmare. Martha announced she needed to gather herbs and asked if anyone wanted to join her. To my surprise, Megan volunteered immediately. "I should get some photos while the light's good," I said, needing space from Jake. Tyler and Cassidy decided to scout the trail ahead. Alone with my camera, I tried to lose myself in the landscape. I followed a game trail up to a ridge and found myself looking down at another small cabin, half hidden among boulders. Curiosity drew me closer. The door was ajar. Interior dark. I told myself Martha must own this place too, perhaps a storage shed. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first, metallic and rotten. As my eyes adjusted, I saw the walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, overlapping. Hikers, campers, families. Some looked decades old, others recent. In each, one person was circled in what looked like dried blood. My heart hammering, I moved deeper into the cabin. A table held what I first took for art projects, intricate sculptures made of bone, feather, and hair, human hair. Animal skulls hung from the ceiling, each painted with symbols similar to those in Martha's cabin. In the corner stood a tall cabinet. Something told me not to open it, but I had to know. Inside, neatly arranged, were backpacks, shoes, watches, cameras, belongings of the people in the photographs. On the bottom shelf, a leather-bound journal. I grabbed it and flipped it open. The first pages were in the same unknown language Martha had been whispering, but later entries were in English. April 2019. The Bradley family. Father tried to fight, took him first. The young one's fear was sweetest. 5 now feed me. October 2021. Solo hiker. Too easy. Must make it last longer. March 2023. 2 women. The taller one knows something. Her dreams are strong. Must be careful. The last entry was dated just days ago. 5 new ones coming. 1 carries deep loss. Perfect vessel. The others will feed well. I dropped the book, bile rising in my throat. As I backed toward the door, I knocked something over, a jar that shattered, spilling dust and tiny bones across the floor. Finding anything interesting? I whirled to find Martha standing in the doorway, blocking my exit. "What is this place?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "My collection." She smiled, revealing teeth too sharp, too numerous. "We all need hobbies out here. Mine is remembering." I clutched my camera like a shield. "Who are you?" "I've had many names. The Apache feared to speak the real one." She took a step closer. "Your sister knew something was coming for her. She heard me calling, just as you do." Ice flooded my veins. "You didn't know Claire." "I know loss when I taste it," she hissed, her voice changing, multiplying like echoes in a canyon. "And yours is exquisite." I bolted, shoving past her with desperate strength. She didn't chase me, just laughed as I ran, a sound like rocks grinding together. I sprinted back toward the main cabin, lungs burning, certain of only one thing. We needed to leave immediately. I burst into the cabin to find Jake alone, sitting motionless at the table. "Jake, we have to go," I gasped. "Martha, she's not what she seems. I found—" "I know," he said quietly. "You... what?" He looked up and his eyes were cold, calculating. "She showed me last night. Took me to her special place." "Then you know we need to get everyone and run." "It's too late for that, Em." He stood slowly. "She chose you. The rest of us, we're just food." Understanding dawned like ice water down my spine. "What did you do, Jake?" "What I had to," he said, voice flat. "She promised to spare me if I helped. 1 sacrifice instead of 5. "Where are the others?" I demanded. As if on cue, the door opened and Megan walked in. Except it wasn't really Megan anymore. She moved all wrong, like a marionette with tangled strings. Her eyes were black pools, and when she smiled, her mouth stretched too wide. "Tyler and Cassidy went to the creek," not Megan said in a sing-song voice. Cassidy was so surprised when he pushed her into the water. I backed away, bumping into the table. My hand closed around Martha's heavy iron teapot. When Jake reached for me, I swung it with all my strength, connecting with his temple. He crumpled to the floor as not Megan screeched, the sound inhuman and piercing. I ran again, this time toward the creek where Cassidy and Tyler had gone. The trail was slippery, muddy from the recent rain. I could hear not Megan crashing through the underbrush behind me. At the creek, I found horror. Tyler's body lay sprawled across the rocks, chest torn open as if by massive claws. Of Cassidy, there was no sign. "Tyler liked to watch," came Martha's voice from behind me. She stood at the edge of the trees, her form shifting subtly, taller one moment, bent and twisted the next. But he didn't understand the rules of the game. "Where's Cassidy?" I demanded. Martha pointed downstream. "Running, hiding. It makes the meat sweeter." Not Megan emerged from the trees, moving in that terrible broken way. Behind her came Jake, blood streaming from his temple, eyes vacant. "You can't fight hunger," Martha said, her voice resonating from everywhere at once. "Not mine, not yours. We all consume something." I backed away, edging toward the creek. My camera bumped against my chest, and suddenly I remembered. The photographs I'd taken earlier of the stone circle, the symbols in Martha's cabin, the patterns I'd seen in her collection, the Apache warnings Megan had read about. In the stories, skinwalkers gained power through ritual and sacrifice, but they had weaknesses too, symbols that could bind them, trap them. "Claire didn't hear you," I said, stalling for time. "She was sick, depressed. You didn't get to her." Martha's form flickered like a bad TV signal. "All weakness calls to hunger," she snarled. "I have fed on despair for centuries." I fumbled with my camera, pulling up the images I'd taken. There, the stone circle with its intricate pattern. I turned the screen toward her and spoke the words I'd seen written in the journal, a phonetic approximation of that ancient language. Martha screamed, the sound like tearing metal. Her form convulsed, stretching and contracting. Not. Megan dropped to her knees, black fluid pouring from her eyes and mouth. I seized my chance, darting past them toward the trees. A hand grabbed my ankle. Jake, his eyes now black as Martha's, face twisted in rage. I kicked free and ran blindly, branches whipping my face. A voice called my name. Cassidy's voice. I found her huddled in a hollow beneath a fallen tree, her leg badly broken, face streaked with dirt and tears. "Tyler," she sobbed. "He just pushed me, out of nowhere. Then that thing got him." "We have to move," I told her, helping her up. "Can you walk?" "Not fast," she grimaced. "What the hell is happening, Emma?" "Something old," I said, supporting her weight. "Something that feeds on fear and pain." We limped through the gathering darkness, guided only by the faint glow of my camera screen. Behind us came sounds of pursuit, breaking branches, inhuman calls. Once, I glanced back to see 3 figures silhouetted against the moonlight, moving in uncanny synchronicity. "There," Cassidy pointed weakly. "Is that a light?" In the distance, a pinprick of yellow shone through the trees. As we drew closer, I made out the shape of a ranger station. Hope surged, then died as we reached the small building. It was abandoned, emergency generator providing just enough power for a single light. But it had a door, a lock, radio equipment. I got Cassidy inside and barricaded the entrance with a desk. The radio was dead, but I found a first aid kit and tended to her leg as best I could. "What was in that cabin?" she asked through gritted teeth. I told her everything, the photographs, the journal, Martha's true nature. As I spoke, shadows gathered outside the windows, pressing against the glass like curious children. "We just need to survive until morning," I said, trying to sound confident. "Someone will come looking when we don't return to the trailhead." The radio crackled suddenly to life, making us both jump. Through waves of static came a voice. Claire's voice. "Emma? Can you hear me? I'm so cold, Emma." I froze, knowing it was impossible, a trick. "Don't listen," Cassidy warned. The voice changed, becoming Jake's. "Baby, please let me in. I'm hurt. That thing got Megan." Then Martha's voice, no longer human. "Hunger finds all weakness, opens all doors." Something heavy slammed against the door, the barricade shuddering. Again. wood splintered. I frantically scrolled through my camera, finding the clearest image of Martha's binding symbols. Using a marker from the ranger desk, I began drawing them on the walls, the floor, the windows. "What are you doing?" Cassidy asked, voice thin with pain and fear. "Creating a boundary," I said, working faster as the door began to give way. The Apache used these symbols to ward off evil, to bind skinwalkers. The attack on the door stopped abruptly. For a moment, silence. Then, scratching at the windows, the walls, everywhere. The light flickered, dimmed. Martha's voice slithered through the cracks. "Clever girl, but symbols fade. Hunger remains." The radio crackled again, and through the static came a new voice, an official-sounding man. "This is Ranger Dawson. We've received your distress signal. Help is on the way. ETA 20 minutes. Hope surged, but Cassidy looked skeptical. "We didn't send any signal." The scratching intensified, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost formed on the windows, obscuring the shadows outside. "Dawn comes," Martha's voice whispered, "but I keep what is mine." The first rays of sunlight broke through the trees just as the door finally gave way. Martha stood there, her form twisted and elongated, no longer even attempting to look human. Behind her, Jake and Megan lurched forward, their movements jerky and wrong. I held up my camera, the symbols clear on the screen. "You can't enter," I said, voice shaking. "I've bound this place against you." Martha's face split in a grin too wide for her skull. "True, but you must leave eventually." As if on cue, the sound of a helicopter broke the morning silence, growing louder. "Help really is coming," Cassidy breathed. Martha's form flickered, agitation evident. "A temporary reprieve," she snarled, backing away from the door. Jake and Megan followed, their movements becoming more frantic as the helicopter sounds intensified. Within minutes, the rescue team arrived. 3 park rangers who looked confused but professional as they assessed the situation. They loaded Cassidy onto a stretcher, asking questions I could barely process. "Flash flood," I explained numbly. "Separated us. Wild animal attack." As they carried us to the helicopter, I looked back toward the trees. 3 figures stood watching, Martha, Jake, and Megan, their forms indistinct in the morning light. As the helicopter lifted off, they melted into the shadows beneath the ancient pines. The official report listed Tyler as killed by a mountain lion. Jake and Megan were recorded as missing persons, presumed dead after extensive searches found no trace. Cassidy backed my story about flash floods and animal attacks, though I sometimes caught her looking at me strangely, as if wondering how much of what she remembered was real. I developed my photographs weeks later, after the nightmares had started to fade. Most were normal: desert landscapes, wildlife, our smiling group at the trailhead. But in one, taken of Martha's cabin at dusk, a figure stood in the window that hadn't been there when I took the shot. Claire. Her eyes dark pools, her mouth stretched in that too wide smile. Sometimes now, when I'm alone, I hear whispering, words just beyond comprehension. I've caught my reflection moving when I stand still. 2 days ago, I found a small circle of stones on my doorstep, arranged in a pattern I recognize all too well. Hunger remains. And I'm afraid part of Martha came home with me, nestled somewhere behind my eyes, patient and ancient, waiting to feed. My name is Ethan Pierce. This happened in August 2024. I wake up sometimes in the dead of night, my body slick with sweat, still feeling her cold fingers on my face. The doctors tell me the tremors will subside eventually. They say the same about the nightmares. What they don't understand is that they aren't nightmares if they actually happened. I was 34 when I decided to hike the Mogollon Rim Trail in Arizona. It wasn't an impulsive decision, not exactly. After Melissa finalized the divorce in June, I'd felt hollowed out. like someone had scooped everything vital from inside me and left just enough to maintain the appearance of a functioning human. 16 years together, gone. My therapist suggested reconnecting with nature might help process everything. I'd never been much of an outdoorsman, preferring spreadsheets to sleeping bags, but desperation makes you consider options you'd normally dismiss. I adopted Max from the shelter 3 weeks before the trip. He was a 2-year-old German Shepherd mix with intelligent eyes and a quiet demeanor that matched my own. The shelter staff seemed surprised when I chose him. Apparently, he'd been returned twice for being too intense. But we understood each other immediately. Sometimes another broken soul recognizes its counterpart. I spent those 3 weeks reading hiking forums, purchasing gear, and planning our route. The Mogollon Rim area seemed perfect, challenging enough to demand my full attention, but established enough that a novice like me wouldn't end up as a cautionary tale. We would hike for 5 days, camping along designated points, before looping back to where I'd leave my car. The online reviews described spectacular views and the tranquility of ancient ponderosa pine forests. None mentioned Willow Canyon. None mentioned Loretta Blackwood. The first day went exactly as planned. Max and I arrived at the trailhead parking lot around 7 a.m. The August air was already warming, but the forest promised shade. I double-checked my pack: tent, sleeping bag, portable stove, food for both of us, first aid kit, extra clothes, headlamp, multi-tool, maps, charged power banks, and water purification tablets. Everything had its place, each item carefully researched and selected. The only spontaneous addition was the small flask of whiskey tucked into a side pocket, a gift from my brother when I told him about the trip. "You look like you're preparing for war, not recreation," an older man chuckled as he walked past me in the parking lot. He wore a faded ranger hat and carried only a small day pack. "First time on the rim?" "That obvious, huh?" I smiled sheepishly, adjusting the straps of my overstuffed backpack. "Nothing wrong with being prepared." He nodded toward Max, who sat patiently by my side. "Smart, bringing him along. Good company and good protection. Just keep him leashed near the edges. It's a long way down." I thanked him for the advice and set out, feeling a mixture of anxiety and anticipation as we hit the trail. Max trotted ahead of me, his nose working overtime at the cascade of new scents. The morning passed in a rhythm of footfalls, birdsong, and the gentle rustle of wind through pines. By noon, we reached the first overlook. The vastness of the landscape before me, an ocean of trees stretching to the horizon, interrupted by dramatic drops where the earth seemed to have been cleaved by some ancient force, made my divorce papers and empty house seem suddenly small. We continued after lunch, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The trail was well marked, my preparation was paying off, and Max's occasional glances back to check on me made me feel less alone than I had in weeks. By late afternoon, we reached our first designated campsite. I set up the tent, a process I'd practiced multiple times in my backyard, and prepared a simple dinner for us both. As darkness fell, I sat beside my small fire, Max's head heavy on my lap, and watched stars appear in numbers I never saw in Phoenix. For the first time since Melissa left, I didn't feel the constant ache in my chest. That was the last normal night I would know. The second day started typically enough. We broke camp after a quick breakfast and continued along the marked trail. The terrain grew more challenging, with rocky inclines that made my calves burn pleasantly with exertion. Around midday, as we navigated a particularly dense section of forest, I noticed Max's behavior change. He began pausing frequently, ears perked forward, sometimes growling softly at nothing I could discern. "What is it, buddy?" I asked, scanning our surroundings. The forest seemed peaceful enough: towering pines, patches of wildflowers, distant bird calls. But Max remained agitated. At first, I chalked it up to wildlife, perhaps the scent of a deer or coyote. But as the afternoon wore on, his unease became more pronounced. Then I noticed we hadn't passed a trail marker in over an hour. I checked my phone's GPS app, but the signal had vanished. No service wasn't surprising this deep in the forest, but the GPS should still work. I pulled out my backup, a handheld GPS device, only to find it too was malfunctioning, the screen flickering between coordinates that made no sense. Must be the tree coverage, I muttered to Max, trying to reassure myself more than him. I consulted my paper map, attempting to triangulate our position based on landmarks and the last marker I remembered. According to my calculations, we should veer eastward to reconnect with the main trail. An hour later, I knew we were lost. The landmarks didn't match the map, and the sun, now lower in the sky, seemed to be in the wrong position relative to our direction of travel. A flutter of panic rose in my chest, but I suppressed it. Panic was the enemy of clear thinking, and clear thinking was what we needed. "We'll be fine," I told Max firmly. "We have supplies for days. Worst case, we backtrack tomorrow morning." That's when I noticed the silence. No birdsong, no insects. Even the wind seemed to have died completely, leaving the forest in an unnatural stillness that pressed against my eardrums like cotton wool. Max stopped suddenly, the fur along his spine rising as he stared ahead into the trees. I followed his gaze and saw it, a thin trail of smoke rising in the distance, perhaps half a mile away. Smoke meant people. People meant help. "Come on, boy," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. "Let's check it out." Max whined, planting his feet firmly on the ground. He'd never refused to follow me before. "It's okay," I coaxed, attaching his leash for the first time since we'd left the main trail. "We'll be careful." He came reluctantly, staying pressed against my leg as we moved toward the smoke. The forest seemed to thicken around us, the trees growing closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to block most of the fading daylight. The ground beneath our feet changed too, becoming softer, almost spongy, with strange pale mushrooms sprouting in clusters around the bases of the trees. After 20 minutes of difficult hiking, we emerged into a small clearing. At its center stood a cabin that seemed to have grown organically from the forest floor. Built of dark wood and river stone, it had a sagging porch and a steep roof covered in moss. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney. Window boxes overflowed with plants I couldn't identify, flowers of deep purple and blood red, herbs with silvery leaves that seemed to shimmer in the dimming light. Max began trembling against my leg, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Hello," I called out, hesitating at the edge of the clearing. "I'm sorry to intrude. My dog and I are a bit turned around. Could you help us get back to the main trail?" For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the cabin's door creaked open, and a woman emerged onto the porch. She appeared to be in her 70s, with a crown of silver hair plaited into a thick braid that hung down her back. She wore a long dress of faded blue fabric, and her hands, when she raised them to shield her eyes from the setting sun, were gnarled like the roots of an ancient tree. "Well, well," she said, her voice surprisingly melodious for her apparent age. "Don't get many visitors out this way. You said you're lost?" "Yes, ma'am. We were hiking the rim trail, but somehow got off track. Our GPS isn't working, and I can't seem to make sense of the map out here." She smiled, revealing teeth that were too straight and white for her weathered face. "It happens. The forest can be tricky if you don't know its ways. I'm Loretta Blackwood." "Ethan Pierce," I replied, "and this is Max." At the sound of his name, Max's growl deepened. I gave his leash a gentle tug, embarrassed by his behavior. "Sorry about that. He's usually very friendly." Loretta waved a dismissive hand. "Animals sense things differently than we do. No offense taken." She peered at the darkening sky. "It'll be night soon. The trail's a good 2 hours from here, and these woods aren't safe to navigate in the dark. You're welcome to stay. I've got a spare room, and I just put a stew on." Everything I'd ever been taught about stranger dangers screamed at me to decline. But the forest had become oppressively dark. I had no idea where we were, and the thought of stumbling around in unfamiliar woods at night seemed far more dangerous than accepting the hospitality of an elderly woman. Besides, I had Max, my knife, and enough wilderness training to defend myself if necessary. "That's incredibly kind," I said. "We don't want to impose." "Nonsense," Loretta replied, her smile widening. "It gets lonely out here. Company would be a welcome change." She turned and disappeared into the cabin, leaving the door ajar, an invitation. Max planted his feet again, refusing to move toward the cabin. "Come on, boy," I urged. "It's just for one night. Tomorrow we'll get back on track." He came, but every line of his body communicated reluctance. I should have listened to him. God, I should have listened. The interior of Loretta's cabin was both exactly what I expected and somehow deeply wrong in ways I couldn't immediately identify. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a bubbling pot hanging over the flames. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with a complex scent, part medicinal, part floral, with an underlying earthiness that reminded me of freshly dug soil. Mismatched furniture crowded the main room. A sagging couch covered in crocheted blankets, wooden chairs with seats worn smooth by years of use, tables cluttered with strange objects, feathers, stones, small animal bones, glass jars filled with powders and liquids of various colors. "Make yourself comfortable," Loretta said, gesturing to the couch. "I'll fetch you something to drink. You must be parched after wandering these woods." Before I could respond, she disappeared through a beaded curtain into what I assumed was the kitchen. I sank onto the couch, wincing as my muscles registered how much hiking we'd done. Max refused to lie down, instead positioning himself between me and the beaded curtain, his posture alert. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered, scratching behind his ears. "We'll rest tonight and head out first thing tomorrow." Loretta returned carrying a tray with 2 steaming mugs. "Herbal tea," she explained, offering me one. "My own blend. Good for tired muscles and clearing the mind." The mug was warm in my hands, the liquid inside a deep amber color. The steam carried an aroma similar to the herbs hanging from the ceiling, but with something else underneath, something metallic and strange. "Thank you," I said, but didn't drink immediately. Loretta settled into a rocking chair across from me, cradling her own mug. "So, what brings a city boy like you out to these parts alone?" she asked. I raised an eyebrow. "How do you know I'm from the city?" She chuckled, the sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Your gear is too new, your hands too soft, and you got lost on a marked trail." She sipped her tea. "No judgment. We all start somewhere." I felt a flush of embarrassment but couldn't argue with her assessment. I needed to get away, clear my head. "Ah," she nodded sagely. "Running from something or toward something?" "Both, maybe." I finally took a small sip of the tea. It was surprisingly pleasant, sweet at first, then slightly bitter, with a warmth that seemed to spread through my body more quickly than should be possible. "This is good." "Family recipe," she said, watching me intently. "Now tell me what you're running from." "Ethan Pierce." I never talk about personal matters with strangers. Never. Yet somehow I found myself telling this woman about Melissa, about the divorce, about the hollowness that had consumed me for months. The words poured out of me as if a dam had broken. As I spoke, the cabin seemed to grow warmer, the air thicker. My limbs felt increasingly heavy, and it became difficult to keep my thoughts straight. Max nudged my hand insistently, whining. I realized I'd stopped petting him at some point. "Sorry, boy," I mumbled, my tongue feeling strangely thick. I looked at the mug in my hand, now nearly empty, and a distant alarm bell rang in my mind. "I think I should turn in," feeling very tired suddenly. Loretta nodded, rising smoothly from her chair. "Of course, the forest air affects people differently. The spare room is through there." She pointed to a narrow door beside the fireplace. "There's water and everything you need. Sleep well, Ethan Pierce." I stood, swaying slightly, and picked up my backpack. Max stayed pressed against my leg as we crossed to the indicated door. The spare room was small and spare, just a narrow bed, a nightstand with an oil lamp, and a small window with curtains that appeared to be made from the same faded blue fabric as Loretta's dress. "Good night, Miss Blackwood, and thank you again," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Call me Loretta," she replied with that too-white smile, "and you're very welcome. So very welcome indeed." I closed the door between us and practically collapsed onto the bed. Max jumped up beside me, something I normally wouldn't allow, and pressed his warm body against mine, his eyes fixed on the door. "It's okay," I slurred, patting him clumsily. "Just sleep." The last thing I remember before darkness claimed me was the sound of Loretta Blackwood humming tunelessly in the next room, and the strange scuttling noises that seemed to come from within the walls. I woke to sunlight streaming through the small window and the disorienting sensation of not knowing where I was. As memories of the previous day filtered back, I sat up and immediately noticed two things. Max was gone, and I felt terrible. My head pounded, my mouth was bone dry, and my limbs felt unnaturally heavy, as if I'd aged decades overnight. "Max," I called weakly, looking around the small room. My backpack remained where I'd dropped it, apparently untouched, but the door was slightly ajar. I didn't remember leaving it open. I forced myself to my feet, fighting a wave of dizziness. "Max?" I called again, more urgently this time. Pushing through the door, I entered the main room of the cabin. It looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, and shabbier. The bundles of herbs hanging from the ceiling cast strange, dancing shadows as they swayed in a breeze I couldn't feel. "Good morning, city boy." Loretta's voice came from a corner of the room I could have sworn was empty a moment before. She sat in her rocking chair, hands busy with some kind of needlework. "Sleep well?" "Where's my dog?" I asked, my voice rasping. "Outside," she replied without looking up from her work. "Seemed restless this morning, so I let him out to explore. Don't worry, he won't go far." Alarm bells rang louder in my head. I need to find him, and then we need to get back to the trail. "No rush," Loretta said, finally looking up. In the daylight, her appearance was subtly different. Her silver hair seemed thinner, her face more lined, her eyes sunken in their sockets, but her teeth still gleamed unnaturally white when she smiled. "I made breakfast, and you look like you could use more rest." "Thank you, but we really should get going." I moved toward the cabin's front door, fighting the strange lethargy that still gripped my body. "The trail isn't going anywhere," Loretta said, her voice hardening slightly. "Sit, eat, regain your strength." Something in her tone made me hesitate. Hand on the doorknob. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. And for a bewildering moment, I felt my body wanting to obey, as if invisible strings were tugging me toward the table where a plate of what looked like scrambled eggs and biscuits waited. I forced myself to turn the knob instead. I need to find Max first. The door swung open to reveal the clearing, now bathed in morning light. But something was wrong. The quality of the light was different. Softer, more golden, like late afternoon rather than morning. And the clearing itself seemed changed. The trees at its edge appeared to have moved closer, their branches reaching toward the cabin like grasping fingers. "Max," I called, stepping onto the porch. "Here, boy." A distant bark answered me, coming from the western edge of the clearing. Relief washed through me as I spotted him, a blur of motion among the trees. He bounded toward me, but stopped short about 10 feet from the porch, barking insistently. "What's wrong, buddy?" I started toward him. I wouldn't. Loretta was suddenly beside me, though I hadn't heard her approach. "There's a reason he won't come closer." I turned to her, confusion and growing unease making my heart pound faster. "What are you talking about?" Instead of answering, she bent down and drew a line in the dirt with her finger. As the digit passed over the ground, the soil darkened as if burned. "Protection," she said simply. against what lurks in these woods. I stared at the line, then at Max, who continued barking from beyond it. Let me get this straight. You're saying my dog can't cross that line? That's absurd. Is it? Loretta straightened, fixing me with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than her physical appearance. Why don't you ask him to come to you? See what happens. My unease deepening, I called to Max again. Come, boy. Come here. Max whined, pacing back and forth, but made no move to cross the invisible barrier Loretta had indicated. What did you do to him? I demanded, fear beginning to crystallize into anger. Nothing, Loretta said mildly. The line doesn't keep him out. It keeps other things in. She turned and walked back into the cabin. Come have breakfast, Ethan Pierce. We have much to discuss. I stood frozen, torn between following Max into the forest and demanding answers from Loretta. My instincts screamed to grab my pack and run, but my body felt wrong, weak and uncoordinated, and the thought of navigating the dense forest without knowing where we were terrified me. Besides, Max wouldn't come when called, which had never happened before. I'll be right back, boy, I called to Max, who answered with another frantic bark. I promise. I followed Loretta back inside, determined to get answers, then retrieve my dog and get as far away from this place as possible. The breakfast, sitting on the rough wooden table, looked normal enough. Golden scrambled eggs, biscuits with what appeared to be honey, and a mug of something steaming that smelled like coffee. My stomach growled despite my apprehension. Eat, Loretta said, taking a seat across from me. You'll need your strength. For what? I remained standing, hands gripping the back of an empty chair. For staying alive in these woods. She picked up her own mug and sipped. You think you wandered off the trail by accident? The forest called you here, Ethan Pierce, just as it calls all who are vulnerable. What are you talking about? I got lost. It happens to hikers all the time. Not on that trail. Not with maps and GPS and all your careful preparation. She set her mug down with deliberate care. This part of the forest doesn't appear on any map. Hasn't for centuries. I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. Right, and I suppose you're going to tell me you're some kind of witch. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. We've been called many things over the years. We? I glanced around the empty cabin. Figure of speech. She pushed the plate of food toward me. Sit. Eat. I don't mean you harm. Then let me get my dog and point us toward the trail. I can't do that. Can't or won't. She sighed, suddenly looking every one of her apparent years and perhaps more. Both. The forest brought you here for a reason. It's hungry. A chill ran down my spine despite the cabin's warmth. You're insane. Perhaps, but that doesn't make me wrong. She gestured again to the chair. Sit, and I'll explain what I can. Against my better judgment, I sat. I didn't touch the food. These woods are old, Loretta began, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality. Older than the names we've given them. Older than the borders of states and nations. They remember a time before people walked here, and they don't much care for our presence now. Trees don't have memories, I said flatly. Don't they? She raised an eyebrow. How would you know? Have you asked them? I didn't dignify this with a response. The forest requires balance, she continued. For every life it sustains, it must take one in return. For centuries, that balance was maintained naturally. Birth and death, predator and prey. But then people came with their axes and saws and burning. They took without giving back. The balance shifted. So what? The forest became haunted? I couldn't keep the sarcasm from my voice. Not haunted, hungry. Her eyes seemed to darken as she spoke. It found a solution. Me. You expect me to believe you're what? The forest's designated human sacrifice collector? She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Crude, but not entirely inaccurate. I serve the forest. In return, it gives me time. More time than any human should have. You're claiming to be immortal now? Not immortal, just extended. She tapped a gnarled finger against her mug. I've lived in this cabin for a very long time. Ethan Pierce. I've seen generations come and go in the towns beyond these trees. I've watched the trails change their course, watched technology transform from compasses to those satellites you rely on so completely. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. Whether she was delusional or something else entirely, I knew one thing with sudden clarity. I needed to get out of this cabin immediately. That's fascinating, I said, trying to keep my voice casual as I stood. But Max and I really need to get going. Thanks for the hospitality. Your dog isn't yours anymore, Loretta said quietly. He knows what I am, what this place is. That's why he won't cross the line. Then I'll go to him. You can try. She didn't move to stop me as I headed for the door. But I should warn you, the forest doesn't like to release what it's claimed. And it has claimed you, Ethan Pierce, just as it claimed the others. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. What others? She gestured to a small wooden chest in the corner that I hadn't noticed before. See for yourself. Against my better judgment, I crossed to the chest and lifted its heavy lid. Inside were dozens of small objects: watches, rings, compasses, eyeglasses, pocket knives, personal effects, all appearing to date from different eras. Mementos, Loretta said from directly behind me, making me jump. I hadn't heard her move. From those who came before you. I slammed the chest shut and spun to face her. You're a murderer. No. She shook her head. A caretaker. I ease their passing. Make it painless. It's the least I can do. She reached out as if to touch my face, and I recoiled. The forest would take them anyway. Take you anyway. But its methods are far less gentle than mine. I'm leaving. Now. I pushed past her, heading for the door with renewed determination. The tea is already working. Ethan Pierce, she called after me. Can't you feel it? The heaviness in your limbs? The fog in your mind? Each cup takes a little more of your essence, transfers it to the forest. To me. When I glanced back, her skin seemed somehow tighter, her hair thicker, her posture straighter. By the third cup, most can't even stand. I yanked the door open and stumbled onto the porch. The clearing looked wrong again. The light was different, more golden, as if no time had passed since I'd last stood there. Max was still at the edge of the trees, still barking frantically. "Max, come!" I shouted, then stepped off the porch, intending to go to him if he wouldn't come to me. As soon as my foot touched the ground beyond the porch steps, pain shot through my body, searing white-hot agony that started at my toes and raced upward like lightning. My vision blurred, my knees buckled, and I collapsed face first into the dirt. I told you, Loretta's voice came from above me, the forest has claimed you. With enormous effort, I rolled onto my back, gazing up at her where she stood on the porch. What did you do to me? I gasped between waves of pain. Nothing that wasn't already being done. She sighed, looking genuinely regretful. Come back inside, Ethan. Let me make it easier. No, I ground out, forcing myself to my hands and knees. The pain intensified, but I pushed through it, focusing on Max's desperate barking. Max, help! To my shock and relief, Max suddenly darted forward, crossing the invisible line Loretta had drawn. He rushed to my side, whining and nudging me with his nose. Impossible, Loretta whispered, her confidence faltering for the first time. The barrier should keep him out. Guess your magic isn't what it used to be, I panted, clutching Max's fur for support. Loretta's face darkened. No matter. Neither of you will make it through the forest. Not now. She turned and disappeared back into the cabin. Using Max's support, I dragged myself a few more feet away from the porch. The pain began to recede the farther I got from the cabin, allowing me to eventually stand on trembling legs. We need to get out of here. Boy, I told Max, who pressed reassuringly against my side. Back to our packs. But when I looked toward the cabin, I realized with horror that the door had vanished. In its place was a solid wall of dark wood, as if the entrance had never existed. My backpack with all our supplies, water, and my phone was still inside. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." A laugh echoed from the trees around us, Loretta's voice but somehow coming from everywhere at once. "Did you think it would be that easy, city boy? Nothing leaves these woods without the forest's permission. Nothing." Max growled, his hackles rising as he faced the tree line. I followed his gaze and felt my blood freeze in my veins. The trees were moving, not swaying in a breeze but actually shifting position, their trunks bending at impossible angles, their roots pulling free of the earth with wet, sucking sounds. "Run!" I gasped, and we did. We crashed through the underbrush with no direction in mind except away. Away from the cabin, away from Loretta, away from the moving trees. Max led the way, his powerful body breaking a path through the dense forest. I followed, gasping for breath, still weak from whatever had been in that tea. The forest seemed to fight us with every step. Branches whipped at my face. Roots rose from the ground to trip me. Thorny vines appeared where none had been a moment before. The light filtering through the canopy remained the same unchanging golden hue, giving no indication of the passage of time. My watch had stopped at 9:17 the previous night. After what felt like hours of desperate flight, I collapsed against the trunk of a massive ponderosa pine, my lungs burning. Need to rest. I wheezed to Max, who paced anxiously in front of me, clearly wanting to continue. As I tried to catch my breath, I took stock of our situation. No water, no food, no navigation tools, no way to call for help. And a forest that somehow seemed alive and hostile surrounding us in every direction. The rational part of my brain, the accountant who believed in numbers and logic, kept insisting there had to be a reasonable explanation. Loretta had drugged me. The moving trees were hallucinations. The pain when I stepped off the porch was some kind of psychosomatic response to the drugs. But Max had seen it too. Max had been afraid before I drank the tea. And Max was still afraid now, his body tense, his ears constantly swiveling to track sounds I couldn't hear. "What do we do, boy?" I asked him, not expecting an answer but needing to hear a voice, even my own, in the oppressive silence of the forest. Max stopped his pacing and looked at me, then deliberately turned his head to gaze in a specific direction. He looked back at me, then in that direction again. "You want to go that way?" I asked incredulously. It looked exactly like every other direction. Dense trees, underbrush, shadows. Max barked once and began walking, stopping after a few feet to look back at me expectantly. "This is crazy," I muttered, but pushed myself to my feet and followed. At this point, one direction was as good as another, and Max's instincts had proven trustworthy so far. We walked for what seemed like hours, the light never changing, the forest remaining unnaturally silent except for the sounds of our passage. My throat grew parched, my stomach cramped with hunger, and my legs felt increasingly leaden. But Max continued forward with purpose, occasionally pausing to make sure I was still following. Just as I was about to beg for another rest, the trees thinned, and we emerged into a small clearing. Unlike the one surrounding Loretta's cabin, this one was perfectly circular and filled with waist-high grass that rippled like water despite the absence of wind. At its center stood a stone structure. Not a building exactly, but a ring of standing stones, each about my height, arranged around what appeared to be an altar stone. "What the hell?" I breathed, coming to a stop at the edge of the clearing. Max whined, pressing against my leg but not entering the circle of grass. The stone ring looked ancient, older even than the forest around it. The stones were weathered and covered in lichen, but I could make out carvings on their surfaces. Spirals, strange angular symbols, and what might have been stylized figures. The altar stone in the center was flat-topped and stained with dark patches I didn't want to examine too closely. "We should go around," I said to Max, unnerved by the sight. But as I turned to skirt the edge of the clearing, I heard a familiar voice carried on the still air. "You can't escape it, Ethan Pierce," Loretta's voice coming from directly behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. "Show yourself," I shouted, my voice cracking from thirst and fear. Laughter echoed through the clearing, seeming to come from the stones themselves. "I'm everywhere in these woods, city boy. The forest is me, and I am the forest." Max growled, his body tensed for action as he stared at the stone circle. "What do you want from us?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. "What I've always wanted," Loretta's voice replied. "Life, time, energy. The same things every living creature desires." Her voice shifted, now coming from within the ring of stones. "The same things you want, Ethan Pierce, to continue, to persist, to avoid the darkness that awaits us all." As she spoke, the air within the stone circle began to shimmer, like heat rising from summer pavement. A figure coalesced, not the elderly woman from the cabin, but something older, more primal. Her silver hair had become a wild tangle reaching to her waist, her blue dress transformed into robes of bark and leaves, her skin as gray and textured as ancient wood. Only her teeth remained unchanged, unnaturally straight and white against the inhuman face. "What are you?" I whispered, taking an involuntary step back. "I've had many names over the centuries," she said, remaining within the stone circle. "Witch, hag, forest spirit. But names are just sounds humans make to feel control over things they don't understand." Her form flickered like a bad television signal, momentarily revealing something beneath the humanoid shape. Something comprised of twisted branches, empty eye sockets, and too many limbs. I blinked, and she was the wild-haired woman again. "The tea," I said, my mind racing to understand. "You were stealing my life force." "Borrowing," she corrected with a smile that split her wooden face unnaturally wide. "I need it to maintain this form, to maintain the boundary between the forest and the world beyond. Without me, the hunger would spread beyond these trees." She took a step toward the edge of the circle, and Max barked furiously. "Your dog understands more than you do. He sees what lives in the shadows of this place. Let us go," I pleaded. "We won't tell anyone about you or this place." "No one would believe you if you did," she replied, her voice tinged with sadness. "But it doesn't matter. No one leaves these woods once the forest has tasted them. And it's already tasted you, Ethan Pierce." She pointed one twisted finger at me. "Feel your strength ebbing? The lightness in your head? The tea was just the beginning. Even now, the forest draws from you with every breath you take." I did feel it, a persistent weakness that went beyond thirst and hunger, beyond the exertion of our flight through the woods. It was as if something essential was being siphoned from my cells with each passing moment. "The longer you run, the more it will hurt," Loretta continued. "Come to me willingly. Let me ease your passing. Let me make it gentle." "No," I said, backing away further. "Max, come on." Max stood his ground, hackles raised, eyes fixed on Loretta. "Your dog won't save you," she said. "Nothing will." As if triggered by her words, the grass surrounding the stone circle began to move, parting to reveal dark, wet soil that pulsed like a living thing. From its depths rose what I first took to be roots, thin, pale tendrils that wriggled obscenely in the unchanging golden light. But roots don't have faces. Roots don't have hands. And roots certainly don't have the remnants of hiking clothes still clinging to partly decomposed bodies. I screamed as the first corpse pulled itself fully from the soil, the desiccated remains of what had once been a man, his flesh gray and shrunken, his eyes gone, but his mouth still working, still trying to form words with a tongue too rotted to function. "Previous guests," Loretta said casually, gesturing to the twitching corpses as more emerged from the soil. "The forest preserves what it consumes, in its way. Nothing is truly wasted here." The corpses, 5, 7, a dozen of them began to move toward us with jerky, puppet-like motions. Their hands reached, their mouths gaped, and a terrible moaning filled the air. "Last chance, Ethan Pierce," Loretta called over the chorus of the dead. "Come willingly, or join my little collection in a far less comfortable manner." Max lunged forward suddenly, barking furiously as he placed himself between me and the advancing corpses. His normally warm brown eyes had taken on a strange silvery glow in the unnatural light of the clearing. "Max, no!" I cried, terrified he would be torn apart by the shambling dead. But the corpses hesitated, seeming confused by the dog's presence. Loretta's wooden face contorted in surprise. "Impossible," she hissed. "You're just a dog." Max's bark changed then, becoming deeper, more resonant, until it wasn't a bark at all but a growl that seemed to shake the very air. The silvery glow in his eyes intensified until they shone like twin moons in the golden twilight of the clearing. "No ordinary dog, it seems," Loretta said, her confidence faltering. "What did you bring into my forest, city boy?" I had no answer. I had adopted Max from a shelter just weeks ago. He was a German Shepherd mix, according to the paperwork. Nothing special, nothing supernatural. And yet... "Max?" I called uncertainly. He glanced back at me briefly, and in that moment I saw recognition, intelligence, and something else. Something ancient and wild that had nothing to do with the shelter dog I thought I knew. Then he turned back to face Loretta and the corpses, his growl rising once more. The dead hesitated, their sightless faces turning toward Loretta as if seeking direction. "Take them!" she shrieked, her wooden features contorting with rage. "Take them both!" The corpses lurched forward again, but Max stood his ground. As the first of the dead came within reach, he lunged, jaws closing around what remained of a wrist. There was a sound like branches breaking, and the corpse's hand fell away, crumbling to nothing before it hit the ground. The rest of the body followed, collapsing into a heap of twigs and dust. "No!" Loretta wailed, her form flickering more violently now, revealing more of the twisted, inhuman shape beneath. Max moved with preternatural speed, tearing through the shambling dead as if they were made of paper. Each time his teeth connected, the corpses simply fell apart, returning to the forest floor as piles of organic matter. Within moments, all the dead were gone, and Max stood at the edge of the stone circle facing Loretta across the barrier of grass. His silver eyes blazed with an inner light that matched the now-setting sun. "What are you?" Loretta whispered, backing toward the center of the circle. Max didn't answer, couldn't answer, but his growl conveyed everything necessary. He took a step forward, then another, entering the circle of grass that I had been afraid to cross. "Stay back!" Loretta commanded, her voice cracking with fear. "These stones are my domain, my protection." Max continued forward, unaffected by whatever power the stones possessed. As he crossed the threshold of the inner circle, his form seemed to blur at the edges, becoming larger, more lupine, his fur taking on the same silvery sheen as his eyes. "Guardian," Loretta breathed, the word barely audible. The forest sent a guardian. I watched in awe and terror as Max, or whatever Max truly was, advanced on the witch. She retreated until her back pressed against the altar stone, her wooden fingers scrabbling against its stained surface. "The forest doesn't want you anymore, Loretta Blackwood," I found myself saying, though I didn't know where the words came from. "It's found someone new to maintain the balance." "Impossible," she hissed again, but her form was fluctuating wildly now, unable to maintain its humanoid shape. "I've served for centuries. I've fed it, sustained it." "You've corrupted it," I replied, again with words that didn't feel like my own. I took a step forward, then another, until I stood beside Max at the edge of the inner circle. "Used it for your own purposes. Taken more than your share." "You know nothing," she shrieked, but her voice had become thin, reedy, like wind through dead leaves. "I know the forest chose me. I said, placing a hand on Max's silver-sheened fur. And it chose him to guide me to you. As my fingers touched Max, a jolt of energy surged through me. Not the painful, draining sensation I'd felt since drinking Loretta's tea, but something revitalizing, like stepping into sunlight after months in darkness. Strength returned to my limbs, clarity to my mind. "No," Loretta moaned, her form continuing to destabilize. "No, no, no." Max growled one final time, then lunged across the remaining distance. His jaws closed around what remained of Loretta's throat, and there was a sound like the breaking of the world, a crack that seemed to split the very air around us. Loretta didn't scream, didn't fight. She simply dissolved. Her wooden form crumbled inward, collapsing into a heap of bark and twigs and dried leaves that scattered across the altar stone. Only her teeth remained solid, clattering against the stone like macabre dice before falling still. The moment she disappeared, the forest changed. The golden light shifted, taking on the warm orange hue of true sunset. Birds began to sing in the trees around the clearing. A gentle breeze stirred the grass and ruffled my hair. Max turned to me, and I saw the silver light fading from his eyes, his form returning to the familiar shape of the shelter dog I'd adopted. But now I understood why he'd been returned twice for being too intense. Why he'd chosen me, or rather, why he'd allowed me to choose him. "Were you waiting for me?" I asked softly, kneeling to stroke his fur. "Did you know this would happen?" He licked my hand, his eyes full of intelligence but offering no answers. A rustling from the edge of the clearing made us both turn. The trees were parting, creating a clear path through the forest. Through the gap, I could see sunlight, hear the distant sound of voices, normal, human voices. "Is that the way back?" I asked Max, who barked once in apparent confirmation. As we approached the newly formed path, I noticed something strange happening to the stone circle behind us. The standing stones were sinking slowly into the earth, disappearing as if being swallowed by the forest floor. The altar stone was the last to go, taking Loretta's teeth with it into the depths. We walked for perhaps an hour along the clear path, the forest around us seeming more normal with each step, less primeval, less threatening. Eventually, we emerged onto a marked trail. A sign nearby read, "Mogollon Rim Trail, 2 miles to Willow Canyon Lookout." Willow Canyon, like the name Loretta had given her forest domain. "Max," I said, kneeling again to look into his now normal brown eyes, "what happens now? Am I supposed to stay? To take her place?" He huffed and nudged me toward the trail that would lead us back to civilization. "I can go?" I asked, hardly daring to believe it. He barked once, tail wagging. Relief washed through me, followed quickly by confusion. "But she said the forest needs someone to maintain the balance." Max gave me a look that seemed remarkably like exasperation, then deliberately pressed his nose against my chest, directly over my heart. Understanding dawned slowly. "I'm taking it with me," I whispered. "A piece of it, of you. That's how it works now." He barked again, seemingly pleased with my comprehension. We made our way back to the trailhead without incident, though hikers we passed gave us curious looks, probably due to my disheveled appearance and lack of gear. One couple offered us water, which I accepted gratefully. When we finally reached my car, still parked where we'd left it, my phone showed it was Sunday afternoon, just over 48 hours since we'd set out. It felt like weeks had passed. Years. As I drove us home to Phoenix, Max slept peacefully in the passenger seat. He looked like an ordinary dog again. No silver glow, no supernatural size. But sometimes, when he dreams, his paws twitch as if running, and I swear I can see a hint of that otherworldly light behind his closed eyelids. I never went back to the Mogollon Rim Trail, never went hiking again, actually, but I didn't need to. The forest came with me in a way. I feel it at odd moments. a sudden awareness of growing things, of the cycles of life and death that govern the natural world. Sometimes, in dreams, I walk among ancient trees, feeling their slow heartbeats, their patient wisdom. Sometimes, I dream of Loretta Blackwood. In these dreams, she stands at the edge of a clearing, watching me with hollow eyes, her wooden hands reaching. But Max is always there, silver-eyed and vigilant, keeping her at bay. I don't know what I am now. Not quite human, perhaps, but not a monster like Loretta became. Max ensures that. He guides me, grounds me, reminds me of the balance that must be maintained. The doctors can't explain the tremors that sometimes take me, or the nightmares that wake me screaming. They can't explain why plants in my apartment grow with unnatural vigor, or why birds and squirrels gather on my balcony each morning as if waiting for something. They can't explain why my hair, once beginning to thin at 34, now grows thick and strong, or why the lines that had started to form around my eyes have faded. They just call it good genes, good luck. But I know better. I know what price is being paid for these gifts and who is paying it. I feel them sometimes. The lost hikers, the wanderers, the vulnerable souls who venture too deep into certain woods. I feel the moment the forest claims them, the moment their essence joins the vast, ancient network that now includes me. I mourn for them. I didn't ask for this connection, this responsibility. But Max chose me for a reason, I suppose. Perhaps I had just enough humanity to remember compassion, but just enough darkness to accept the necessity of balance. At night, when the city sleeps and the connection to the distant forest is strongest, I sit on my balcony with Max beside me, his head heavy on my lap. Together, we listen to the whispers of leaves we cannot see and the songs of birds that exist only in our shared awareness. And sometimes, very rarely, when the moon is full and something stirs in the depths of the forest hundreds of miles away, Max looks up at me with silver-bright eyes, and I know that someone has strayed from the path, that the cycle continues, that the balance must be maintained. I stroke his fur and whisper, "Not like Loretta, never like Loretta." He licks my hand in solemn agreement. We are guardians now, Max and I. Better than what came before, but not quite what should be. Temporary stewards of an ancient pact until someone better comes along. Until then, we watch. We wait. We maintain the balance. And if you're hiking in certain woods, stick to the marked trails. Don't drink tea offered by strangers. And if you see a man with haunted eyes walking a German shepherd with an unusually intense gaze, turn back. Turn back while you still can. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm 34 years old. This happened in September 2024, though sometimes it feels like yesterday, and other times like it happened to someone else entirely. The Superstition Mountains had been calling to me for months. At first, it was just casual research, reading about the lost Dutchman's gold mine, looking at trail maps, watching YouTube videos of hikers navigating the rugged terrain. But soon it became an obsession. I needed to escape the concrete jungle of Phoenix where I'd been working as an IT consultant for 5 years. The monotony of typing code while staring at the same 4 walls of my apartment day after day was suffocating me. So when my coworkers suggested a weekend camping trip, I jumped at the chance. There were 6 of us, myself, Megan Hughes, our project manager, always organized and slightly bossy, Trevor Banks, a fellow programmer with a dry sense of humor who never went anywhere without his vintage Canon camera, Alicia Dominguez, our UX designer who'd grown up in Tucson and claimed to know Arizona's wilderness like the back of her hand, Chris Wilson, our newest team member, quiet but eager to fit in, and James Foster, our supervisor who insisted on joining us despite his obvious discomfort with the outdoors. After days of planning and preparation, mostly led by Megan, who created detailed spreadsheets of supplies and emergency contacts, we set off early Friday morning in 2 vehicles. The plan was to hike the Peralta Trail to Fremont Saddle, set up camp in one of the less trafficked areas, then explore the surrounding wilderness for 2 days before heading back Sunday afternoon. As we drove east from Phoenix, Alicia regaled us with legends of the Superstition Mountains. The Apache believe these mountains are a gateway to the underworld, she said, her voice dropping dramatically. They call it the land where the devil lives. Comforting, Trevor muttered beside me, not looking up from his camera as he adjusted the settings. And then there's the Lost Dutchman's gold mine, Alicia continued. Jacob Waltz supposedly found rich gold deposits in the 1870s, but took the location to his grave. Dozens of treasure hunters have died searching for it. Died how? Chris asked, his eyes wide with interest. Dehydration, falls, snake bites, Alicia shrugged. Or if you believe the legends, they were claimed by the guardian spirit that protects the gold. James scoffed from the driver's seat. Let's keep the ghost stories for around the campfire, shall we? But something about Alicia's words sent a chill down my spine. Perhaps it was the way the jagged mountains loomed ahead of us, their reddish peaks stark against the clear blue sky, or maybe it was something more primal. A warning I should have heeded. We reached the Peralta trailhead around 10 a.m. The parking lot was nearly empty, which struck me as odd for a Friday, but I attributed it to the sweltering September heat. The temperature was forecasted to reach 100 degrees, though it would cool significantly at night. We shouldered our packs, checked our water supplies one last time, and set off. The first few hours of the hike were uneventful but grueling. The trail wound upward through saguaro cacti and mesquite trees, offering little shade from the relentless sun. James struggled the most, stopping frequently to catch his breath and wipe sweat from his forehead. "You doing okay, boss?" I asked during one such break. He nodded, though his face was flushed red. "Just been too long since I've done any real hiking. Don't worry about me." By early afternoon, we reached Fremont Saddle and were rewarded with a spectacular view of Weaver's Needle, a towering volcanic spire that dominated the landscape. We took photos and rested while Alicia consulted her map. "There's a spot about half a mile off trail that would make a perfect campsite," she said, pointing to an area west of the main path. "It's near a seasonal creek that might still have some water this time of year, and it's sheltered enough to block the wind." "Off trail?" Megan frowned. "Is that allowed?" "Technically, yes," Alicia replied. "Just have to make sure we follow leave no trace principles. Trust me, it's worth it for the privacy and the view." After some discussion, we agreed to follow Alicia's suggestion. As we left the marked trail, I noticed James typing something on his phone. "Getting a message out before we lose signal?" I asked. He nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "Just letting my wife know we're okay so far. She worries." I checked my own phone, one bar of service that flickered in and out. I sent a quick text to my sister, who was watching my dog Rusty for the weekend, then switched to airplane mode to conserve battery. The terrain became more challenging as we picked our way through scrub and over loose rocks. Chris slipped once, scraping his palm on a jagged stone, but it was just a minor cut. After about 40 minutes of slow progress, we reached the spot Alicia had described. It was indeed perfect, a relatively flat area surrounded by twisted juniper trees that offered some protection from the elements, with a stunning view of the valley below. A dry creek bed ran nearby, with a few stagnant pools of water still visible among the rocks. "See, what did I tell you?" Alicia said proudly as we shrugged off our packs. We set up camp efficiently, with 3 two-person tents arranged in a rough semicircle. I would be sharing with Trevor, Megan with Alicia, and James with Chris. By the time we finished, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the surrounding rocks in warm oranges and deep purples. Trevor spent some time photographing the sunset while the rest of us gathered wood for a small fire. As darkness fell, we sat around the flickering flames, eating freeze-dried meals and passing around a flask of whiskey James had brought. The mood was relaxed and cheerful. Chris told us about his previous job in Seattle, And Megan shared stories about a disastrous camping trip she'd taken with an ex-boyfriend in Yosemite. Even James seemed to have forgotten his discomfort, laughing and joining in the conversation. Then Alicia, her face eerily illuminated by the firelight, began telling us about Manuel Peralta. The Peralta Trail we hiked today? It's named after a Mexican rancher who allegedly discovered gold in these mountains in the 1840s, she said. But when he returned with a large group to mine the gold, they were massacred by Apaches. Some say it was just a territorial dispute, but others believe the Apaches were protecting something much older and more dangerous than gold. What do you mean? I asked, feeling that same inexplicable chill from earlier. Alicia leaned forward. There are stories about something the Apache called Nakinsen, the Wanderer, a spirit that takes the form of a human but isn't human at all. They say it lures people deep into the mountains and changes them. Changes them how? Chris asked. It empties them out and wears them like clothing, Alicia whispered. From the outside, they look the same, but inside, there's nothing left but the Wanderer. Jesus, Alicia, Megan said, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. Way to ensure none of us sleep tonight. It's just a story, James said firmly. Every wilderness area has its boogeyman tales. But I noticed how he glanced nervously at the darkness beyond our campfire's glow. We stayed up a bit longer, trying to lighten the mood with more pleasant topics, but Alicia's story had cast a pall over the evening. One by one, we retired to our tents, with Trevor and I being the last to turn in. Do you think there's anything to those legends? Trevor asked as we settled into our sleeping bags. Nah, I replied, though I wasn't entirely convinced. Just local folklore designed to keep people away from the gold, or whatever resources they wanted to protect. Probably, he agreed. Still, there's something about this place that feels, I don't know, heavy. I knew exactly what he meant. Despite my exhaustion from the day's hike, sleep proved elusive. The night was filled with strange sounds, the wind whistling through the rocks, creating an almost human-like moaning, small animals scurrying outside our tent, and once what sounded like distant singing, though it was so faint I convinced myself I'd imagined it. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were chaotic and disturbing. I was running through the mountains, pursued by something I couldn't see but could sense getting closer. The landscape kept shifting, impossible geometric patterns forming in the rocks. And there was a figure standing atop Weaver's Needle, a silhouette that seemed to be watching me with malevolent interest. I woke with a start just before dawn, my heart racing. Trevor was still asleep beside me, his breathing deep and even. I unzipped the tent quietly and stepped outside. The world was painted in shades of gray and blue as night prepared to give way to morning. The air was cool and still. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the lingering unease from my dreams. Something caught my eye near the dry creek bed, a flicker of movement. I squinted, thinking it might be a coyote or javelina, but it was a human figure. Alicia. She was kneeling by one of the stagnant pools, her back to me, doing something I couldn't make out. Alicia, I called softly, not wanting to wake the others. She didn't respond or turn around. I approached cautiously, the ground cold beneath my bare feet. As I got closer, I could see she was trailing her fingers through the muddy water, drawing patterns I couldn't discern from my angle. Her hair hung loose around her face, obscuring her profile. "Hey," I said when I was just a few feet away. "Everything okay?" She went still. Then, slowly, she turned her head. Just her head, her body remaining in the same position. The movement was so fluid, so unnatural that my breath caught in my throat. It was Alicia's face, but something was wrong. Her expression was blank, her eyes reflecting the pre-dawn light like an animal's. She stared at me without blinking, her head tilted at an impossible angle. "The water," she said in a voice that was hers but somehow not hers, deeper with an odd cadence. "It remembers everything that's happened here." My skin crawled. "Alicia, you're freaking me out." She smiled then, a wide, empty smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Go back to sleep, Daniel. It's not time yet." Before I could respond, she turned back to the water. I stood frozen for a moment, then retreated to my tent, my heart hammering in my chest. I told myself she was just sleep-deprived, or maybe sleepwalking, but deep down, I knew something was very wrong. I crawled back into my sleeping bag, watching the tent entrance as if expecting Alicia to appear at any moment. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I fell into a fitful sleep. The next time I woke, it was to Trevor shaking my shoulder. "Dude, come on, everyone's up and having breakfast." I blinked, disoriented. Sunlight filtered through the tent fabric, indicating it was well into morning. "What time is it?" "Almost 9, Trevor replied, already dressed in hiking clothes. "You were dead to the world. Bad dreams or something?" The memory of my encounter with Alicia came rushing back. "Did you see Alicia this morning, before everyone else was up?" Trevor shook his head. "No, she and Megan were still in their tent when I got up around 7. Why?" I hesitated. It sounded absurd in the daylight. "Nothing. Thought I heard someone moving around early." Outside, the rest of the group was gathered around a small camp stove where James was frying something that smelled like bacon. Alicia sat on a rock nearby, sipping from a metal mug, looking perfectly normal, her hair neatly braided, her manner animated as she chatted with Chris. "Morning, sleepyhead," Megan called when she saw me. "Sorry," I mumbled, accepting a mug of coffee from James. "No worries," he said. "We're all on vacation time." I studied Alicia surreptitiously as I ate, looking for any sign of the strangeness I'd witnessed, but she seemed entirely herself, laughing at Chris's jokes, discussing the day's hiking plans with her usual enthusiasm. Had I dreamed the whole thing? It had felt so real, but in the clear light of day, surrounded by normal conversation and the smell of coffee, it seemed increasingly implausible. After breakfast, we decided to split up for the morning. Megan wanted to stay at camp to read and rest her ankle, which was bothering her after yesterday's hike. Trevor and James planned to explore the area around Weaver's Needle, while Alicia suggested she, Chris, and I check out a small cave system she knew about a mile or so from camp. I was reluctant to go anywhere with Alicia after my early morning experience, real or imagined, but I couldn't think of a reasonable excuse to decline. Besides, Chris would be with us, and I was curious despite my misgivings. We set off around 10, carrying day packs with water, snacks, and first aid supplies. Alicia led the way confidently, though I noticed she wasn't following any visible trail. "Are you sure you know where you're going?" I asked after we'd been hiking for about 40 minutes through increasingly rough terrain. "Absolutely," she replied without turning around. "I've been here before. It's just a little hard to find if you don't know what you're looking for." Chris shot me a reassuring smile. "She seems to know her stuff." I nodded, but an uneasy feeling was growing in my gut. The landscape had changed subtly. The vegetation was sparser, the rock formations more twisted and jagged. Even the quality of light seemed different, harsher somehow, despite the occasional cloud passing overhead. "So, Alicia," I said, quickening my pace to walk beside her, "when exactly were you here before?" She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "A few years ago. Came with some friends from college." "And they knew about these caves too?" A slight hesitation. "No, I found them on my own." Before I could ask another question, she stopped abruptly and pointed. "There. See that dark spot in the cliff face? That's the entrance." I looked where she was indicating. A shadowy crevice in a red sandstone wall about 50 yards ahead. It wasn't particularly remarkable or obvious. I would have walked right past it without noticing. "It doesn't look very big," Chris commented. "It opens up inside," Alicia assured him. "Just have to squeeze through the entrance." As we approached, I felt increasingly apprehensive. The opening was indeed narrow, barely wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. Cool air flowed out from the darkness, carrying a faint, unidentifiable smell. Alicia pulled a headlamp from her pack and strapped it on. "I'll go first, then Daniel, then Chris. Stay close and watch your footing." Without waiting for a response, she turned sideways and slid into the crevice. After a moment's hesitation, I followed, fighting against a powerful instinct to turn and run. The entrance was even tighter than it had appeared, the rough stone scraping against my chest and back as I inched forward. For a terrifying few seconds, I thought I might get stuck, but then the passage widened, and I stumbled into a larger space where Alicia was waiting, her headlamp creating strange, shifting shadows on the rock walls. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, unable to speak, my heart still racing from the claustrophobic entry. Chris emerged a moment later, looking equally unsettled. That was intense. "It gets better," Alicia said, turning to illuminate more of the cave. She was right. The space opened into a roughly circular chamber about 20 feet across, with a ceiling high enough that we could stand comfortably. The walls were smooth in places, as if water had once flowed through, and glittered with tiny embedded crystals where the light struck them. "This is just the first chamber," Alicia said, her voice echoing slightly. "There's a whole system back here." She led us to the far side of the room, where another, larger opening led deeper into the cliff. As we passed through this second entrance, the temperature dropped noticeably, and that strange smell grew stronger, an earthy, metallic odor that reminded me vaguely of blood. The second chamber was larger and more impressive than the first. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like stone teeth, with corresponding stalagmites reaching up from the floor. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness beyond the reach of our lights, creating a steady, rhythmic sound. "This is amazing," Chris whispered, his earlier discomfort seemingly forgotten as he gazed around in wonder. It was beautiful, in a primal, alien way, but I couldn't shake my growing sense of dread. Something felt wrong about this place. Something beyond the natural unease of being underground. Alicia moved with purpose toward the back of the chamber, where the ceiling dipped lower. "The best part is through here," she said, indicating yet another passage. "How far does it go?" I asked, not sure I wanted to venture any deeper. "Not far," she replied. "Just one more room. But it's worth it, I promise." I looked at Chris, who shrugged. "We've come this far." The third passage was shorter but required us to crouch down as we moved through. It opened into a smaller chamber with a perfectly flat floor, as if it had been deliberately leveled. In the center stood a roughly circular stone about waist-high, its surface worn smooth. Alicia walked directly to this stone and placed her hand on it. "This is it," she said softly. "This is what I wanted to show you." "What is it?" Chris asked, approaching cautiously. She traced some invisible pattern on the stone's surface. "The Apache used this place for ceremonies. This was their altar." I frowned. "How do you know that?" "I told you," she said, still not looking up. "I've been here before." The way she said it sent another chill through me. "Alicia, I think we should head back. The others will be wondering where we are." She ignored me, continuing to trace patterns on the stone. Then she began to hum a low, monotonous tune that seemed to resonate in the small space. Chris shot me a concerned look. "Hey, Alicia, you okay?" She stopped humming abruptly and turned to face us. In the harsh beam of my headlamp, her face looked different, angular, almost predatory. "I need your help with something." "What kind of help?" I asked, taking an involuntary step backward. "A small sacrifice," she said, her voice dropping to that deeper register I'd heard by the creek. "Just a little blood." Before either of us could react, she pulled a hunting knife from her pack, a wicked-looking blade I hadn't seen before. "Whoa!" Chris exclaimed, backing away. "What the hell, Alicia?" "It's not Alicia," I said, the realization hitting me with terrible clarity. "It's not her." She, or the thing that looked like her, smiled that empty smile. Clever Daniel. But too late. She lunged at Chris, who was closer, slashing with the knife. He cried out as the blade caught his forearm, opening a deep gash. Blood welled immediately, shockingly bright in the beam of my headlamp. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Chris by his uninjured arm and pulling him toward the passage. But Alicia, or whatever was wearing Alicia's form, moved with inhuman speed, blocking our exit. "The ceremony requires 3, it said in that horrible wrong voice. 1 to give, 1 to take, 1 to become." I thought frantically of the backpack I wore. Did I have anything that could be used as a weapon? My small pocket knife seemed laughably inadequate against her larger blade and unnatural strength. "What did you do with the real Alicia?" Chris demanded, clutching his bleeding arm. A smile stretched across her face, too wide, revealing teeth that looked slightly too sharp. "She's here. Part of her. Anyway. The rest belongs to Nakinsen now." My blood ran cold as I remembered her words around the campfire. The Wanderer, the spirit that emptied people out and wore them like clothing. "When?" I asked, trying to keep her talking while I inched toward a heavy stalagmite broken off near the base. "When did you take her?" "Last night," it replied, watching me with those reflective eyes. "While you all slept. She came to the water, just like I knew she would. They always do when I call." "And what do you want from us?" Chris asked, his voice shaking slightly. "I told you. A sacrifice." It gestured with the knife toward the stone altar. "Blood, freely given, opens the way. Blood, forcibly taken, seals it." "And the third?" I asked, my fingers closing around the broken stalagmite. It was heavy, with a jagged end that might do some damage. "The third becomes the vessel," it said simply. Then, moving with that unnatural speed again, it grabbed Chris and dragged him toward the altar. I didn't think, just acted. I swung the stone club with all my strength, catching the thing wearing Alicia's body on the side of the head. There was a sickening crack, and it stumbled, releasing Chris. But it didn't fall. Instead, it turned to me slowly, a dark liquid that wasn't quite blood oozing from the wound. "That was a mistake," it said, voice now a guttural growl that barely resembled human speech. It came at me then, knife flashing in the beam of my headlamp. I swung the stalagmite again, but it ducked under my blow and drove the knife into my thigh. Pain exploded through my leg, hot and sharp. I cried out, falling to one knee. "Daniel!" Chris shouted. He had retrieved his own pack and was holding something, his canister of bear spray. The creature turned toward him, and Chris unleashed a cloud of capsaicin directly into its face. The effect was immediate and shocking. The thing wearing Alicia's body let out an inhuman screech, dropping the knife and clawing at its eyes. Its movements became spasmodic, jerky, as if it was fighting to maintain control of its host. "Come on," Chris yelled, helping me to my feet. I gritted my teeth against the pain and stumbled toward the passage, leaning heavily on Chris. Behind us, the creature continued to shriek, the sound echoing horribly in the confined space. Navigating the passages was a nightmare. I was weakening from blood loss, and Chris was injured as well. But fear gave us speed. We half crawled, half dragged ourselves through the narrow entrance crevice and emerged into the blinding sunlight. "We have to get back to camp," Chris gasped. "Warn the others." I nodded, unable to speak. My leg was on fire, blood soaking through my pants and running down into my boot. Chris helped me hobble in what we hoped was the right direction, both of us glancing fearfully over our shoulders. But the creature didn't immediately pursue us. Perhaps the bear spray had incapacitated it more than we'd realized, or maybe it was biding its time. We stumbled through the wilderness for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes or so. The terrain looked completely unfamiliar. Either we were going the wrong way, or the landscape itself had somehow changed. Finally, I had to stop. "Need to bandage this," I managed through gritted teeth, indicating my leg. Chris helped me sit against a boulder and then used a bandana from his pack to create a makeshift tourniquet above the stab wound. His own cut had mostly stopped bleeding but looked angry and red. "Do you think that thing is really—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "I don't know," I replied honestly, "but it's not Alicia anymore." "How do we find our way back?" he asked, scanning the unfamiliar landscape. "Nothing looks the same." I pulled out my phone, though I wasn't optimistic. As expected, there was no signal, and the GPS app showed our location as an error. We need to get to higher ground, I decided. Try to spot Weaver's Needle or some other landmark. Chris nodded and helped me up. We continued our painful journey, climbing gradually toward a ridgeline about a quarter-mile away. The sun beat down mercilessly, and my vision was beginning to blur at the edges. From pain, blood loss, or dehydration, I wasn't sure. When we finally reached the ridge, the view did nothing to reassure us. The landscape spread out below looked nothing like what we'd hiked through the day before. The familiar red sandstone formations were replaced by darker, more twisted rock structures. Even the vegetation seemed different, sparser, more gnarled. "This isn't possible," Chris whispered. "It's like we're in a completely different part of the mountains." A terrible thought occurred to me. Or maybe we're not in our mountains anymore. Chris looked at me sharply. "What do you mean?" "Alicia, the thing. It said something about blood, opening a way and sealing it." I gestured at the alien landscape. What if it wasn't speaking metaphorically? What if we've crossed over to somewhere else? "That's crazy," Chris said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Crazier than what we just saw in that cave?" He had no answer for that. We stood in silence for a moment, the implications sinking in. Then Chris pointed suddenly. "Look, over there." In the distance, perhaps a mile away, was a column of smoke rising into the sky. "A campfire," I suggested hopefully. "Maybe, worth checking out anyway." We made our way down from the ridge, moving as quickly as my injured leg would allow. The smoke remained visible, guiding us through the unfamiliar terrain. As we got closer, I began to make out shapes around the fire. People, it seemed, though there was something odd about their movements. "Hello," Chris called when we were about 100 yards away. "We need help." The figures around the fire froze, then slowly turned in our direction. Even at that distance, I could tell something was wrong. They stood too still, their postures unnatural. "Chris," I said quietly, gripping his arm, "I don't think we should go any closer." But it was too late. One of the figures had detached from the group and was approaching us. As it drew nearer, I saw with mounting horror that while it had a human shape, its features were blurred, as if not fully formed. It moved with the same fluid, wrong grace that Alicia, or the thing controlling her, had displayed. "Run," I whispered. We turned and fled, ignoring the pain of our injuries. Behind us, I heard a sound like many voices speaking at once. Not words, exactly, but a chorus of moans and whispers that somehow conveyed hunger and anticipation. We ran without direction, only away from that terrible campfire and its inhuman attendants. My leg screamed in protest, the bandage now soaked through with fresh blood, but terror kept me moving. Eventually, we stumbled upon a small ravine and half climbed, half fell into it, concealing ourselves among the rocks. We lay there, breathing hard, listening for signs of pursuit. "What the hell were those things?" Chris gasped when he'd caught his breath. I think they might have been other victims," I replied grimly. "People who came to these mountains and never left. Not completely, anyway." "Like Alicia." I nodded. The wanderer must have taken many forms over the years. We stayed hidden as the light began to fade, debating our next move. My wounded leg had gone from painful to frighteningly numb, and Chris's arm was showing signs of infection, red streaks extending outward from the cut. "We can't stay here," he said finally. "We'll die of exposure or blood loss." "But we don't know which way to go," I pointed out, "and those things are out there." Chris was quiet for a moment. "What time is it?" I checked my watch. "Just after 6. The sun sets around 7 this time of year. Maybe we could follow it? Head west?" It was as good a plan as any. We waited until the sun was low on the horizon, then used it to orient ourselves and set off westward, hoping it would lead us back to familiar territory, or at least away from wherever we were now. We walked in silence, saving our strength. The landscape continued to be unsettlingly alien. Rock formations that seemed to defy physics, vegetation that looked almost but not quite like the desert plants we knew. Once, we passed what appeared to be a small pool of water, but when Chris reached toward it, I grabbed his hand. "Don't," I warned, remembering Alicia by the creek. "I don't think anything here is what it seems." Night fell, bringing a cold that penetrated to the bone. The stars above were wrong, somehow. Too bright, arranged in patterns I didn't recognize. The moon, when it rose, was fuller than it should have been, with a reddish tinge that reminded me sickeningly of blood. We continued walking by its light, too afraid to stop. Occasionally we heard sounds in the distance, cries that might have been animal or human or something else entirely. Once, I was certain I heard Alicia's voice calling my name. "Don't look back," Chris muttered, seeing me hesitate. "Just keep moving." Hours passed in a haze of pain and exhaustion. I was becoming delirious, seeing shapes in the darkness that disappeared when I looked directly at them. Chris wasn't faring much better. His breathing was labored, and he kept muttering to himself. Then, sometime in what must have been the early hours of the morning, the landscape began to change. The twisted formations gave way to more natural-looking rocks. The vegetation became recognizable again, saguaros and mesquites and palo verde trees. "Chris," I said, hope flickering in my chest, "I think we're getting back." He didn't respond. I turned to find him standing still, looking upward. Following his gaze, I saw Weaver's needle silhouetted against the night sky. "We made it," he breathed. "We're back in our mountains." Relief washed over me, quickly followed by urgency. We need to find the others. Warn them about Alicia. We adjusted our course toward where we thought our campsite should be, moving with renewed purpose despite our injuries. As dawn began to lighten the sky, we spotted smoke from a campfire. Our campfire, I hoped. "Hello," I called as we approached. "Trevor, James, Megan." There was a flurry of activity, and then Trevor emerged from between two juniper trees, his face registering shock when he saw our condition. "Daniel, Chris, what the hell happened to you guys?" Others appeared behind him, James and Megan, their expressions mirroring Trevor's horror. "Where's Alicia?" I demanded, scanning the campsite frantically. "She's not with you?" Megan asked, her face paling. "She hasn't come back since you all left yesterday morning." Chris and I exchanged a look of dawning terror. "We need to leave," I said urgently. "Right now. Pack up and get to the cars." "What? Why?" James asked. "And what happened to you two? You're both injured." "There's no time," Chris interrupted. "Something's happened to Alicia. She's dangerous now." "Dangerous how?" Trevor pressed. I shook my head, unable to explain in a way that wouldn't sound insane. "Please, just trust us. We need to go. Now." Perhaps it was the desperate tone of my voice or the wild look in my eyes, but they began to gather their belongings without further argument. Within 20 minutes we had struck camp and were ready to move. As James was shouldering his pack, he froze, staring at something behind us. Alicia. We all turned. She stood at the edge of the clearing, looking exactly as she had when we'd left with her the day before, except for one detail. Her headlamp was still on, the beam weak in the growing daylight. "Hey, guys," she said, smiling. "Sorry I'm late. Got a bit turned around coming back." "Stay back," I warned the others, pulling Chris behind me. "That's not Alicia." Megan looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "What are you talking about? She's right there." "Daniel's right," Chris said, his voice shaking. "Something's happened to her. Something in the caves." "Caves?" Trevor echoed, confused. "What caves?" Alicia, or the thing wearing her face, continued to smile. "They're confused, Trevor. We got separated yesterday and they must have fallen and hit their heads." She took a step forward. "Look at their injuries.
They need medical attention. Concern written on his face. Are you okay, Alicia? We were worried. Don't. I shouted, but it was too late. James reached her, placing a hand on her. What happened out there? In one fluid motion, Alicia grabbed his wrist and twisted.
There was a sickening crack, and James screamed, falling to his knees. Then Alicia, no, the Wanderer, was holding the same hunting knife from the cave, its blade catching the early morning light. "Run!" I shouted to Trevor and Megan. "Get to the cars." For a crucial moment they hesitated, clearly torn between their injured boss and the safety of escape. "I've waited so long," the thing wearing Alicia's face said, its voice shifting between her normal tone and that deeper, inhuman register. So many travelers, but never the right combination. Until now. It moved with that terrible fluid grace, slashing the knife across James's throat before any of us could react. Blood sprayed in a crimson arc, and James made a horrible gurgling sound as he collapsed. That broke the spell. Trevor grabbed Megan's arm and they bolted, racing down the trail toward the trailhead. Chris and I followed as best we could with our injuries, adrenaline temporarily masking the pain. Behind us, the Wanderer let out a sound that was half laugh, half howl. A sound no human throat should be able to produce. I risked a glance back to see it kneeling beside James's body, one hand pressed to his bleeding throat, the other tracing patterns in the pooling blood. "It's performing the ritual," Chris gasped as we stumbled downhill. "Like in the cave. Blood forcibly taken." "To seal the way," I finished, remembering its words. We caught up to Trevor and Megan, who had slowed slightly to allow us to keep pace. "What the hell is happening?" Trevor demanded, his face pale with shock. "What's wrong with Alicia?" "It's not Alicia anymore," I panted. "It's something else, something that's taken her form." "That's impossible," Megan protested, though her voice trembled. "Things like that don't exist." "Tell that to James," Chris snapped. We continued our desperate flight down the mountain, staying on the main trail this time. My injured leg threatened to give out with each step, but fear kept me moving. Behind us, I could hear something pursuing, not with the heavy footfalls of a normal human, but a soft, sliding sound punctuated by that awful, inhuman laughter. "It's gaining on us," Trevor warned, glancing back. "Keep going," I urged. "The trailhead can't be far now." But the trail seemed longer than it had on the way up, twisting endlessly through the desert landscape. The sun rose higher, its heat oppressive, and my vision began to tunnel from pain and blood loss. "There," Megan suddenly cried, pointing ahead. "I can see the parking lot." Sure enough, the dusty lot was visible through the trees, perhaps a quarter-mile away. Our vehicles sat where we'd left them, gleaming in the sunlight like salvation. We pushed ourselves harder, ignoring screaming muscles and injuries. The sounds of pursuit seemed to have faded, but I didn't trust that. The Wanderer was cunning. It might be circling around to cut us off. Finally, we reached the parking lot, gasping for breath. "Keys," I managed, leaning against our SUV to stay upright. "Who has the keys?" Trevor patted his pockets frantically. "I have mine." Megan nodded. "I've got the other set." "Then let's go," Chris said, opening the passenger door of Trevor's vehicle. "No point splitting up now." We piled in, Trevor driving, Megan in the passenger seat, Chris and I in the back. Trevor's hands shook as he turned the key, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought the engine wouldn't start. Then it roared to life and he threw the SUV into reverse, backing out of the space so quickly we were all thrown forward. As he shifted into drive, movement caught my eye. Alicia, the Wanderer, stood at the trailhead, watching us with that empty smile. But it made no move to pursue as Trevor accelerated onto the dirt road leading back to the highway. "We need to get you two to a hospital," Megan said, turning to look at Chris and me in the back seat. Her face was streaked with tears and dust. "And call the police," Trevor added grimly. "Tell them about James." I nodded wearily, the adrenaline finally ebbing away, leaving only pain and exhaustion in its wake. Chris looked even worse, his face gray, the infection from his wound clearly advancing. We drove in tense silence for several miles, the rugged terrain gradually giving way to more traveled roads. My phone beeped as we regained service, dozens of missed calls and texts flooding in, all from my sister, increasingly frantic about why I hadn't checked in. "Should we really tell the police what happened?" Chris asked suddenly, his voice faint. "About what Alicia became? They'll think we're crazy, or worse, that we killed James ourselves." It was a valid concern. The truth sounded insane even to me, who had lived through it. "We tell them we got separated," I decided after a moment. "That Alicia was acting strange, became violent. We don't mention anything supernatural. Just that she attacked James, and we fled." The others nodded solemnly. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was as close as we could come without ending up in psychiatric evaluation. As we approached Apache Junction, the nearest town with a hospital, Trevor suddenly braked hard, swerving to avoid something in the road. I was thrown against my seatbelt, pain flaring in my injured leg. "What the hell?" Megan exclaimed. Trevor was staring through the windshield, his face drained of color. It was Alicia, standing in the middle of the road. "That's impossible," I said, looking around frantically. "We're miles from the trailhead. She couldn't have—" "There!" Chris pointed to the side of the road where a figure stood watching our vehicle. Alicia, still wearing her hiking clothes, still with that unnatural smile. "Drive," I urged Trevor. "Just drive." He accelerated again, the SUV's engine roaring as we sped toward town. But the impossible kept happening. Alicia appeared again and again, standing by the roadside or in the distance on a hillside, or once, terrifyingly, directly behind our vehicle in the rearview mirror, though she vanished when Trevor swerved in panic. "How is it doing that?" Megan whispered, clutching the door handle so tightly her knuckles were white. "I don't think it's bound by the same rules we are," I replied grimly. "Not anymore." Finally, we reached the outskirts of Apache Junction, the desert giving way to civilization. Gas stations, fast food restaurants, strip malls. The apparitions of Alicia ceased as we entered the town proper, as if the presence of so many people somehow weakened the wanderer's influence. Trevor drove directly to the emergency room entrance of Banner Goldfield Medical Center. Within minutes, Chris and I were being whisked away on gurneys, our stories of a hiking accident raising eyebrows but not outright disbelief. While doctors tended to our injuries, police officers arrived to take statements about James. We stuck to our simplified version of events. We'd gotten separated from Alicia, who had returned to camp acting strangely, then violently attacked James with a knife before disappearing back into the wilderness. The officers looked skeptical but wrote everything down, promising to send search parties to find both James's body and Alicia. I wanted to warn them not to go, that what they would find wouldn't be Alicia anymore, but I bit my tongue. They wouldn't believe me, and I'd already skirted the edge of being sent for psychiatric evaluation. My injury required surgery. The knife had damaged muscle but thankfully missed any major arteries or nerves. Chris's wound was more complicated. The infection had spread rapidly, necessitating aggressive treatment and a longer hospital stay. Megan and Trevor visited us daily, their faces haunted. None of us could sleep properly. Nightmares of caves and altars and things wearing human faces like masks plagued our few hours of rest. 3 days after our escape, a grim-faced detective came to my hospital room. They had found James's body, he informed me, but no sign of Alicia. The search was continuing, but given the vastness of the Superstition Mountains, they weren't optimistic about finding her quickly. What he didn't say, but what I read in his expression, was that they now considered her dangerous, a suspect in James's murder rather than another potential victim. If they found her, they would shoot to kill if necessary. I didn't tell him that wouldn't be enough, that what was wearing Alicia's body wasn't something a bullet could stop, not permanently at least. A week later, I was discharged from the hospital, warned to keep weight off my injured leg and given prescriptions for antibiotics and painkillers. Chris remained hospitalized, the infection in his arm proving stubborn. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about the possibility of amputation if it didn't improve soon. I returned to my apartment in Phoenix where my sister had been caring for my dog, Rusty. The familiar surroundings should have been comforting, but I jumped at every shadow, every unexpected sound. Rusty seemed to sense my unease, staying close and growling at nothing I could see. Work granted me medical leave, but the thought of eventually returning to the office, where Alicia's desk would be empty, where James would never again call a meeting, was almost unbearable. I found myself researching other cities, other jobs, planning an escape from the memories that haunted me. 2 weeks after our ordeal, Trevor called me in the middle of the night, his voice tight with controlled panic. "She was outside my apartment," he said without preamble, standing across the street, just watching. My blood ran cold. "Are you sure it was her?" "Positive. Same clothes she was wearing that day? Same expression." He paused. "I called the police, but by the time they arrived, she was gone. They think I'm paranoid, seeing things because of the trauma." "You're not," I assured him. "Have you talked to Megan?" "Yeah, she's scared too. Said she's been getting strange phone calls. No one speaking, just that humming sound we heard in the cave." I remembered all too well that monotonous tune Alicia had hummed before revealing the knife. "It's hunting us," I realized aloud. "Finishing what it started." "What do we do, Daniel?" Trevor asked, his voice breaking slightly. "How do we fight something like this?" I had no answer for him. The next day I visited Chris in the hospital. The doctors had finally decided to amputate his arm below the elbow. The procedure was scheduled for the following morning. He lay in his bed, pale and resigned, the infected limb heavily bandaged. Trevor saw her. I told him quietly, after ensuring no staff were within earshot. "Outside his apartment." Chris closed his eyes briefly. "I'm not surprised. It won't stop until it gets what it wants." "Blood freely given, blood forcibly taken," I recited. "One to give, one to take, one to become." "James was the second," Chris murmured. "Blood forcibly taken. That leaves." "One to become," I finished grimly. We sat in silence for a moment, the full implication sinking in. "What if we could somehow trap it?" Chris suggested eventually. "Send it back to wherever it came from?" "How? We don't even understand what it is, let alone how to fight it." Chris shifted uncomfortably in his bed. "I've been researching, as much as I can from here. The Apache legends about Nakinsen. There's not much, but some stories suggest it can be bound by certain rituals, symbols drawn in salt, words spoken in the old language." I frowned. "Where did you find this information?" "An anthropology professor at ASU. I told him I was researching indigenous folklore for a book." Chris managed a weak smile. He was eager to share. "Even if that's true, we don't know the rituals or the language." "No, but—" Chris hesitated. "There's someone who might. The professor mentioned a man living on the outskirts of the San Carlos Apache Reservation. A keeper of the old ways, he called him. Someone who knows the stories that aren't written down." It was a thin hope, but it was the only one we had. I promised Chris I would follow up on this lead and wished him luck with his surgery the next day. As I left the hospital, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned slowly, scanning the parking lot. There, beneath a mesquite tree some 50 yards away, stood a familiar figure. Alicia. Or what had once been Alicia. Even at that distance, I could feel its gaze boring into me. It didn't move, didn't approach, just watched with that terrible, patient stillness. I hurried to my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I pulled out of the parking space, I looked back to where it had been standing. The spot was empty. That night I dreamed of the cave again, but this time I was the one kneeling before the stone altar, knife in hand, and on the altar lay Trevor, his eyes wide with terror as I raised the blade. Except it wasn't me. I was trapped inside my own body, a passenger watching my hands perform actions I couldn't control. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat, Rusty whining anxiously beside my bed. The dream had felt so real, so vivid, that I immediately called Trevor to assure myself he was alive. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Daniel, what's wrong?" "Nothing," I said, relief washing over me. "Bad dream. Sorry to wake you." "It's okay," he said, suddenly sounding more alert. "I wasn't sleeping well anyway. Keep thinking I hear noises outside." After hanging up, I made a decision. I couldn't wait any longer. The next morning, I would drive to San Carlos and try to find the man Chris had mentioned. True to my word, I set off at dawn, Rusty riding shotgun in my car. I couldn't bear to leave him alone, and somehow his presence was comforting. Animals sense things humans miss, and I trusted his instincts more than my own at this point. The drive to San Carlos took about 2 hours, the landscape changing from urban sprawl to desert scrub to the more vegetated terrain of the reservation. Following Chris's directions, I sought out a small trading post on the reservation's western edge. The elderly Apache woman who ran the place regarded me suspiciously when I asked about the man I was seeking. "John Kidaya?" she repeated, eyebrows raised. "What business you got with him?" I'd prepared a story about researching local folklore for a book, but something in her penetrating gaze made me hesitate. "It's about the Superstition Mountains," I said instead, "about something that lives there, something called Nakinsen." Her expression changed immediately, the suspicion replaced by alarm. She made a small gesture with her right hand, warding off evil. I realized. "You've seen it," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. She studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "John lives about 5 miles north of here. Take the dirt road behind the post, follow it until you see a blue mailbox. Can't miss it." She paused. "He might not talk to you. He doesn't talk to many outsiders these days." I thanked her and returned to my car. Rusty greeted me enthusiastically, apparently having forgiven me for leaving him alone for 10 minutes. The dirt road was rough, my car bouncing over ruts and rocks as I drove slowly northward. The blue mailbox, when I finally spotted it, was faded and dented, almost hidden among the desert vegetation. A narrow path led from the road to a small house about 100 yards back. A simple stucco structure with a metal roof and a covered porch where an elderly man sat in a rocking chair, watching my approach. I parked and got out, instructing Rusty to stay in the car. As I walked toward the house, the man, John Kidaya, I presumed, made no move to greet me, just continued rocking slowly. "Mr. Kidaya?" I called when I was close enough. "My name is Daniel Reeves. I was hoping to talk to you about the Wanderer." He stopped rocking. His face was weathered by years and sun, deep lines etched around eyes that looked far older than the rest of him. "You've seen it," he said, echoing the woman at the trading post. "Yes." He nodded once, then gestured to another chair on the porch. "Sit. Tell me." I did as instructed, haltingly at first, then with increasing urgency as I recounted our experience in the Superstition Mountains. The caves, the altar, Alicia's transformation, James's death, and our subsequent haunting by the thing that wore our friend's form. John listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he sat in silence for several minutes, still rocking gently. "Few who encounter Nakinsen live to tell about it," he said finally. "You were fortunate." "I don't feel fortunate," I replied bitterly. "My friend lost his arm. Another friend is dead, and that thing is still out there, wearing Alicia like a costume, hunting the rest of us." John nodded gravely. "It will not stop until it completes its ritual. 3 souls it needs, 1 freely given, 1 forcibly taken, 1 to become its new vessel when the old one wears out." "Alicia was the first," I said. "She went to it willingly, though she didn't know what would happen." and your boss was the second. Blood forcibly taken. Which means one of us, me, Chris, Trevor, or Megan, is meant to be the third, the vessel. John's eyes met mine. Yes, and until it claims the third, it cannot fully manifest in your world. It is limited, constrained by rules older than humanity. How do we stop it? I asked, leaning forward. There must be a way. He was quiet again, considering. There is a ritual, he said slowly. A way to bind the Wanderer and send it back to the space between worlds, where it belongs. But it is dangerous, and it requires one who has been marked by the Wanderer. Marked? You mean like Chris and me, with our injuries? John shook his head. No, marked in spirit. One whose essence it has tasted, whose dreams it has walked in. I remembered my nightmare, the feeling of being trapped in my own body as I prepared to sacrifice Trevor. I think that might be me. Show me your wound, John commanded. I rolled up my pant leg, revealing the healing stab wound in my thigh. John leaned forward, examining it with a critical eye, then sat back with a nod. Yes, it has tasted your blood, walked in your dreams. You are the one it has chosen. A chill ran through me. Chosen for what? To become the vessel, if it can complete its ritual, but also the only one who can send it back. He fixed me with a penetrating stare. Are you willing to do what must be done? I thought of James lying dead on the mountain, of Chris losing his arm, of Trevor and Megan living in fear. Yes, whatever it takes. John nodded once, decisively. Then I will teach you the binding words, and I will give you what you need to perform the ritual. But you must understand, once begun, there is no turning back. Either you bind the Wanderer, or it takes you. I understand. For the next several hours, John instructed me in the ritual, teaching me words in the Apache language that felt strange and heavy on my tongue, showing me the symbols I would need to draw, explaining the materials I would need to gather. The ritual must be performed at the place where it first crossed over, he told me. The cave with the altar. My stomach clenched at the thought of returning to that terrible place. And I have to go alone? No, you will need others, those who have also encountered the Wanderer. They must stand at the cardinal points, forming a barrier it cannot cross. I thought of asking Trevor and Megan to return to the mountains with me, knowing what waited there, and my resolve wavered. I can't ask them to risk their lives again. Without them, you will fail, John said simply, and the Wanderer will continue its hunt. As the sun began to set, John gave me a small leather pouch containing various items for the ritual. Salt mixed with certain herbs, a small obsidian knife, a bundle of dried sage, and other components I couldn't identify. Return to your friends, he instructed. Prepare them for what must be done, and be vigilant. As the ritual draws closer, the Wanderer will sense your intentions and try to stop you. I thanked him, pocketing the pouch, and turned to go. But John caught my arm, his grip surprisingly strong for a man his age. There is one more thing you should know, he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. If you succeed in binding the Wanderer, the vessel it currently occupies, your friend Alicia, may not survive. I had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a wave of grief through me. Is there any way to save her? John's eyes were sad but resolute. If any part of her remains within, it will be freed when the Wanderer is banished. But after so long in its grasp, there may be nothing left to save. I nodded, accepting this harsh truth, and returned to my car where Rusty waited patiently. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror to see John still standing on his porch, watching me go with an unreadable expression. The drive back to Phoenix was long and contemplative. I had to convince Trevor and Megan to return to the place of our nightmares, risking their lives on a ritual that might not even work. And even if it did work, I would essentially be killing what remained of Alicia. But the alternative was worse. The Wanderer continuing its hunt, claiming one of us as its new vessel, then moving on to other unsuspecting victims, perpetuating its cycle of terror forever. When I arrived home, I called Trevor and Megan, asking them to come to my apartment immediately. They both arrived within the hour, looking tired and on edge. "What's so urgent?" Megan asked as she settled onto my couch, eyeing Rusty, who had placed himself protectively at my side. I took a deep breath and told them everything: my visit to John Kidea, what I had learned about the Wanderer, and the ritual that could potentially end our nightmare. "You want us to go back there?" Trevor asked incredulously when I'd finished. "Back to those caves?" "I know it's asking a lot," I admitted, "but it's the only way to stop this thing, and we can't just leave it out there to prey on other people." "What about the police?" Megan suggested. "Can't we tell them where to find whatever Alicia has become?" I shook my head. Even if they believed us, which they won't, what could they do? Arrest it? Shoot it? John says conventional weapons might slow it down, but they won't stop it. "And we're supposed to trust this guy we've never met?" Trevor countered. "For all we know, he could be feeding you lies or setting us up." "I believe him," I said simply. "I can't explain why, but I do. And, frankly, he's the only lead we have." We argued back and forth for hours, weighing the risks, considering alternatives, processing our fear. Finally, exhausted and out of options, Trevor and Megan reluctantly agreed to help me perform the ritual. "We'll need a fourth person," I pointed out, "for the cardinal points." "What about Chris?" Megan asked. I shook my head. "He's still recovering from his amputation. He's in no condition to hike into the mountains." "So, who then?" Trevor pressed. I thought for a moment. "My sister Kate. She knows something is wrong. I haven't been able to hide how scared I've been. I'll have to tell her the truth anyway to explain my sudden camping trip." They nodded, accepting this solution. We spent the rest of the evening planning the details: when to go, the following weekend, what to bring, minimal camping gear since we'd need to move quickly, and how to protect ourselves as best we could. Trevor suggested bringing bear spray again, given how effective it had been in the cave. After they left, I called Kate and asked her to come over. Telling her the whole bizarre story was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Watching her expression shift from confusion to disbelief to horrified acceptance as I showed her my healing wound and the pouch of ritual components John had given me. "You're serious," she said finally. "This isn't some elaborate prank or a mental breakdown." "I wish it were," I replied honestly. To my surprise and relief, she agreed to help, though her hands trembled as she said it. Kate had always been the practical one in our family, the one who looked after me when our parents died, who always knew what to do in a crisis. Seeing her afraid shook me more than I wanted to admit. The week leading up to our return to the Superstition Mountains was tense. We all reported sightings of Alicia, or rather, the thing wearing her form, watching us from a distance, never approaching, just observing with that unnerving stillness. Megan received more of those silent phone calls, and Trevor's apartment was broken into, though nothing was taken, just rearranged, he said, in subtle ways that only he would notice. I dreamed of the cave every night now, each dream more vivid and disturbing than the last. In the worst of them, I was back at the altar. But this time, I was the sacrifice, unable to move as the Wanderer wearing Alicia's face stood over me with the obsidian knife, chanting words I almost understood. Finally, Saturday arrived. We met at my apartment at dawn, loading our gear into Trevor's SUV. No one spoke much. We were all too aware of what we were facing. Even Rusty seemed subdued, perhaps sensing the gravity of our mission. As we drove toward the Superstitions, I went over the ritual one more time, making sure everyone knew their roles. Trevor, Megan, and Kate would stand at 3 points around the altar, holding bundles of sage and reciting a simple phrase in Apache that I had taught them. Meanwhile, I would perform the main ritual, drawing the binding symbols in salt, reciting the longer incantation, and, finally, confronting the wanderer. We reached the Peralta trailhead around 9, the parking lot more crowded than on our previous visit, a fact that should have been reassuring but somehow wasn't. Would the presence of other hikers deter the wanderer, or would it simply add more potential victims to its hunting ground? We set off at a brisk pace, retracing our steps up the familiar trail. The day was cooler than our previous hike, a light breeze offering some relief as we climbed. No one spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts and memories. When we reached Fremont Saddle, I checked the map John had drawn for me, comparing it with Alicia's original directions. He had marked the location of the cave with surprising accuracy for someone who claimed never to have been there himself. "This way," I said, leading the group off the main trail. The terrain was as challenging as I remembered, but this time we moved with more purpose, more urgency. After about an hour of careful hiking, we spotted the cave entrance, that narrow crevice in the red sandstone cliff that had been the beginning of our nightmare. "That's it?" Kate asked, eyeing the unremarkable opening dubiously. "Don't let appearances fool you," Megan muttered. "That's the gateway to hell right there." We approached cautiously, all of us on high alert for any sign of the wanderer. I distributed headlamps and checked that everyone had their ritual components ready. "Remember," I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn, "no matter what happens, no matter what you see or hear, stay at your positions. If the circle breaks, we're all in danger." They nodded solemnly, fear evident in their faces but outweighed by determination. "Let's do this," Trevor said grimly. One by one, we squeezed through the narrow entrance, moving from the bright Arizona day into the cool darkness of the cave. The smell hit me immediately, that earthy, metallic odor I remembered, but stronger now, with undertones of decay. We navigated the passages carefully, our headlamps creating dancing shadows on the walls. The first chamber was as I remembered it, with its glittering crystal inclusions. The second chamber, with its stalactites and stalagmites, seemed smaller somehow, more confined. And then we were at the third passage, the one leading to the altar chamber. "I'll go first," I said, my voice sounding thin in the oppressive silence of the cave. I crouched down and moved through the passage, emerging into the altar room. The stone sat in the center, exactly as before, but now its surface was stained dark with what could only be blood. James's blood, I realized with a sick jolt. The others followed me into the chamber, their faces pale in the harsh beams of our headlamps. "Form the circle," I instructed, my voice steadier than I felt. "Trevor, north. Megan, east. Kate, west. I'll take the south position, facing the altar." They moved to their positions, forming a rough square around the altar stone. I took my place at the southern point and began removing the ritual components from my pack. The salt mixture, the obsidian knife, the sage bundle. "Light your sage," I told the others, striking a match to ignite my own bundle. The pungent smoke filled the small chamber as they followed suit. I began drawing the symbols John had taught me, pouring the salt mixture in precise patterns around the altar, interlocking spirals and jagged lines that seemed to shift and move in the flickering light of our headlamps. "Now the words," I said, meeting each of their eyes once more. "Remember, no matter what happens, don't break the circle." I began the incantation, the unfamiliar Apache words feeling heavy and powerful on my tongue. As I spoke, the air in the chamber seemed to thicken, pressure building in my ears as if we were deep underwater. The others joined in with their simpler phrases, their voices creating a rhythmic backdrop to my more complex chant. The sage smoke swirled unnaturally, forming shapes that seemed almost deliberate before dissipating. I was halfway through the ritual when we heard it, a low, keening sound coming from the passage behind me. It grew louder, morphing into that familiar, horrible howl that was Alicia's voice and not Alicia's voice. "Keep going," I urged the others as I continued my own chant. A figure appeared in the passage entrance, Alicia, or the thing wearing her form. But it looked different now. Her skin was too pale, almost translucent, with dark veins visible beneath. Her movements were more fluid than ever, almost boneless as she glided into the chamber. "Daniel," it said, its voice shifting between Alicia's familiar tones and something deeper, older. "What are you doing, Daniel?" I forced myself to continue the ritual, though my voice shook. It tilted its head at an impossible angle, regarding me with eyes that now glowed faintly in the darkness. "Do you think your little ceremony can stop me? I who was old when your kind still huddled in caves, fearing the dark?" It moved closer, but stopped at the edge of my salt symbols, hissing like a snake. "Megan," it said, turning its attention to her. "Sweet Megan, did you know James was in love with you? He died thinking of you. I tasted it in his blood." Megan faltered in her chant, tears streaming down her face. "Don't listen," I warned. "It's trying to break your concentration." The Wanderer smiled Alicia's smile, but wrong. Too wide, teeth too sharp. "Trevor. Brave Trevor. Always the quiet one. Always watching through your camera lens instead of living. What would you give to have captured me on film? Proof that the supernatural exists? I could give you that fame you secretly crave." Trevor's voice wavered, but he continued his chant, his knuckles white around his sage bundle. "And Kate," it continued, turning to my sister, "the outsider, the one who doesn't belong. Did your brother tell you what happens if this ritual fails? Did he tell you that I'll wear his skin next, use his hands to tear you apart?" Kate's face was ashen, but to her credit, she didn't break her chant. The Wanderer turned back to me, its expression shifting from mocking to angry. "Enough of this. You cannot bind me, Daniel Reeves. I am beyond your petty magics." It moved forward suddenly, testing the boundary of my salt symbols. Where it touched the line, there was a flash of blue light, and it recoiled with a shriek of pain. I pressed my advantage, raising my voice, pouring all my fear and anger into the ancient words. The air in the chamber vibrated with power now, the salt symbols glowing faintly with the same blue light. The Wanderer began to change, Alicia's form blurring, features running like wax. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of what lay beneath the human disguise, something ancient and terrible, with too many limbs and eyes that burned like embers in a face that wasn't a face at all. Then it lunged at me, crossing the salt line with a shriek of pain and fury. I felt claws tear into my shoulder as I was thrown backward, the obsidian knife spinning from my grip. The others screamed, but to their credit, they maintained their positions, continuing their chants despite their terror. I scrambled to my feet, blood running down my arm, and retrieved the knife. The final part of the ritual required my blood, willing blood, freely given, to seal the binding. The Wanderer circled me, its form constantly shifting between Alicia and the nightmare creature beneath. "You cannot bind me," it hissed, voice alternating between Alicia's and a deeper, inhuman growl. "I am eternal. I am hunger. I will wear your skin when this is done." "You've worn your last skin," I replied, raising the obsidian knife. I slashed my palm deliberately, feeling only distant pain as blood welled from the cut. I pressed my bleeding hand to the altar stone, completing the circle of symbols. "I bind you, Nakinsen," I said, the final words of the ritual rolling off my tongue with a power that seemed to vibrate the very air. "By blood freely given, I cast you out. By these ancient words, I seal your path. Return to the darkness between worlds and trouble this realm no more." The effect was immediate and terrifying. The Wanderer let out a howl that shook the cave, dust and small rocks raining down from the ceiling. Alicia's body contorted impossibly, limbs bending at unnatural angles, face stretching into a silent scream. A blue light began to emanate from within her, growing brighter and brighter until I had to shield my eyes. The others continued their chants, voices steady despite the chaos. The salt symbols glowed with the same blue light, linking together to form a complete circle around the Wanderer. Then came a sound like reality itself, tearing. A high, keening noise that made my teeth vibrate and my ears throb with pain. The blue light intensified to an unbearable brightness, and I heard the wanderers scream. No longer Alicia's voice at all, but something ancient and inhuman, full of rage and hunger and, finally, fear. When the light faded and my vision cleared, Alicia's body lay crumpled on the cave floor, the wanderer gone. I approached cautiously, the others maintaining their positions until I confirmed it was safe. Is it over?" Trevor asked, his voice hoarse from chanting. I knelt beside Alicia's still form, searching for any sign of life. Her skin was cool to the touch, her expression peaceful. There was no pulse at her wrist or neck. "It's over," I confirmed, grief washing over me despite our victory. And Alicia's gone. We bowed our heads in silent mourning, for Alicia, for James, for the people we had been before this nightmare began. Then, carefully, respectfully, we wrapped Alicia's body in a blanket from my pack and prepared to carry her out of the cave. The journey back was solemn and exhausting. We took turns carrying Alicia's body, making slow progress through the difficult terrain. By the time we reached the trailhead, night had fallen. The parking lot was empty except for our vehicle and one ranger truck. The park ranger approached us quickly, alarmed by the obvious burden we carried. We had agreed on our story beforehand, that we had found Alicia's body while hiking, apparently the victim of a fall. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was close enough, and it spared her memory from being tainted by the violence she had committed while possessed. What followed was a blur of police interviews, funeral arrangements, and grief counseling. The official report ruled Alicia's death an accident and James's murder unsolved, though we knew the truth. Chris recovered from his amputation and joined us for both memorial services, his eyes haunted by what we had experienced but relieved that it was finally over. Months have passed since then. Trevor moved to California, unable to stay in Phoenix with its constant reminders. Megan took a leave of absence from work and went to stay with family in Michigan. Chris is learning to adapt to life with a prosthetic arm, his resilience a constant source of inspiration. Kate checks on me daily, worried that the trauma might have broken something in me that can't be fixed. As for me, I still dream of the cave sometimes, of the altar stone and the thing that wore Alicia's face. I've considered moving away like Trevor did, starting fresh somewhere without the shadows of the Superstition Mountains looming on the horizon. But I stay, feeling somehow responsible. A watcher, a guardian who knows the truth of what lurks in those remote places. I went back to visit John Kidea once, a month after the ritual. I found his house exactly as before, but empty. No sign of the old man or where he might have gone. The woman at the trading post claimed not to know who I was talking about, though I was certain it was the same store. Sometimes I wonder if he too was something more than he appeared. Rusty and I still hike, though never in the superstitions. We stick to popular trails, well-traveled paths where the sunlight is bright and other hikers are always within shouting distance. I carry salt in my pack now, and sage, and the obsidian knife John gave me. Talismans against a darkness I hope never to face again, but am prepared for nonetheless. Because that's the thing about true horror. It changes you. It opens your eyes to a world beneath the world, to ancient things that hunger in the shadows. And once you've seen it, you can never unsee it. You can never go back to who you were before. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm 34 years old. This happened in September 2024, though sometimes it feels like yesterday, and other times like it happened to someone else entirely. I tell this story not to frighten, but to warn. The wilderness holds beauty and freedom, yes, but in its most remote corners where humans rarely tread, it holds other things too. Things that wait, things that watch, things that hunger for what only we can give them. If you go to the Superstition Mountains, stick to the marked trails. Don't venture into unmarked caves, and if you meet someone on the trail who seems just slightly off, Someone who smiles too widely or moves too fluidly or watches you with too still eyes, turn back. Return to civilization, to light and noise and the comfort of other human voices. Because the wanderer may be bound, but it is not the only thing that dwells in those ancient places between worlds. And not all such entities can be banished with salt and blood and ancient words. Some can only be avoided. Some can only be outrun. And some, I fear, can only be endured. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 34 years old. This happened in May 2024 when I convinced my best friends from work to join me on what was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. Instead, it turned into a nightmare that still haunts me every time I close my eyes. We'd been planning this trip for months, a week-long hiking and camping expedition through the remote reaches of the Havasupai Indian Reservation in northern Arizona. The four of us worked at the same software development company in Phoenix. Myself, Trevor Wilson, our resident outdoor enthusiast, Megan Chen, the analytical genius who kept us on track, and Kyle Reeves, the newest member of our team who was always eager to prove himself. The plan was simple. Drive to the trailhead at Hualapai Hilltop, hike the 8 miles down to the village of Supai, then explore the magnificent waterfalls and canyons that make the area so famous. Then we'd venture beyond the usual tourist spots into the less-traveled areas of Havasu Canyon. Trevor had read about some spectacular caves and hidden pools that few tourists ever saw. "It'll be like having our own private paradise," he'd said during our planning sessions. How wrong he was. The trouble started before we even reached the trailhead. Our GPS went haywire as we approached the turnoff from Route 66, directing us down a series of increasingly narrow dirt roads that weren't on any map I'd studied. "This can't be right," Megan said, frowning at her phone. "We should have turned back there." "The GPS says this way," Kyle insisted. "It's probably just a shortcut." Trevor, who was driving, pulled over. "Let me check the paper map." But the paper map showed nothing resembling the road we were on. After a heated debate, we decided to backtrack to the highway and start over. By the time we found the correct route to Hualapai Hilltop, we'd lost 3 hours and daylight was fading. "We should stay in the car tonight and start fresh in the morning," Megan suggested sensibly. But Kyle was impatient. "We've got headlamps. The trail's supposed to be well marked. Let's at least get partway down." I should have sided with Megan, but I didn't want to seem like I was chickening out, so I backed Kyle's plan. Trevor, always up for adventure, agreed. That was our first mistake. The switchbacks down into the canyon were treacherous in the darkness. Our headlamps carved weak tunnels of light that did little to illuminate the sheer drop-offs mere inches from our boots. The trail was loose gravel and dirt, making every step a potential slide into the void. About 2 miles down, Trevor froze ahead of us. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. We all stopped. Over the light breeze and the distant murmur of water somewhere far below, I heard what sounded like singing. A woman's voice, high and clear, singing words in a language I didn't recognize. "Probably someone camping," Kyle said, though he didn't sound convinced. "There's no camping allowed on the trail," Megan countered. "Hello," Trevor called out. "Anyone there?" The singing stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse. "Let's keep moving," I said, suddenly eager to reach the wider part of the canyon where we'd planned to make camp. As we continued down, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. Occasionally, I'd hear what sounded like footsteps on the trail behind us, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing but darkness. We finally reached a relatively flat area about halfway down the canyon and decided to make camp. As we set up our tents, I noticed Trevor staring intently into the darkness. "What is it?" I asked. "Thought I saw a light over there," he said, pointing to a cluster of rocks about 100 yards away. "Like a campfire, but green." None of the rest of us had seen anything, and Trevor didn't mention it again that night. We ate a cold dinner of energy bars and trail mix, too exhausted to bother with cooking. Despite my fatigue, sleep didn't come easily. The strange singing echoed in my mind, and occasionally I'd hear what sounded like whispers just outside our tent. I finally drifted off sometime after midnight, only to be jolted awake by Megan's scream. "My pack!" she cried. "It's gone!" We scrambled out of our tents. The sky was just beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn. Megan's backpack, which had contained most of our food, her clothing, and her water purifier had vanished without a trace. "Could an animal have taken it?" Kyle suggested. "What kind of animal unzips a tent? Takes only one backpack and zips the tent back up?" Trevor countered, examining the tent door. We searched the surrounding area but found nothing. No tracks, no sign of Megan's pack, nothing disturbed except for our increasingly frayed nerves. "Maybe we should go back," Megan said. "This doesn't feel right." Part of me agreed with her.
But another part, a stubborn, prideful part, didn't give up so easily. We kept Redwater, I offered. Make it to the village, we can reassess there. Reluctantly, make up our remaining gear and continued down the trail as the sun rose over the canyon walls.
The descent was easier in daylight, but our mood had soured. We hiked mostly in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I kept looking back over my shoulder, unable to shake the sensation of being followed. Around mid-morning, we came across something odd. A small cairn of rocks topped with what appeared to be a doll made of twigs and corn husks. It had no face, just a blank space where features should have been. "Weird," Kyle said, reaching for it. "Don't touch it," Trevor snapped, grabbing his wrist. "Just don't." We gave the strange doll a wide berth and continued down the trail. An hour later, we found another one. And another hour after that. A third. "They're getting bigger," Megan observed quietly. She was right. Each doll was slightly larger than the last. By early afternoon, we reached the outskirts of Supai village. I expected to feel relief, but the place was eerily quiet. The few locals we saw watched us with guarded expressions, quickly ducking into homes or behind buildings when we approached. "Hello," I called out to an elderly woman sitting on a porch. "Can you tell us where to find the tourist office?" She stared at us for a long moment, then spoke in a voice like dry leaves. "You came down the wrong trail." "What do you mean?" Trevor asked. "We came from Hualapai Hilltop." The woman shook her head slowly. "No, you came through the hollows, the old way, her way." Then she stood up and went inside, closing the door firmly behind her. "What the hell was that about?" Kyle muttered. "Let's find the campground," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The village seemed oddly deserted for a popular tourist destination. We found the campground near Havasu Creek, set up our tents, and tried to decide what to do next. "I vote we stick to the original plan," Trevor said. "Hike to the falls tomorrow, then head into the backcountry the day after." "After everything that's happened?" Megan looked incredulous. "My pack is gone, everyone's acting weird, and you still want to go deeper into the canyon?" "That's why we came, isn't it?" Trevor countered. "For adventure." Before the argument could escalate, we were approached by a man who introduced himself as Joseph, a local guide. "Heard you folks came down the old trail," he said without preamble. "Is there something wrong with that trail?" I asked. Joseph's expression was grim. "That trail's been closed for years. Too dangerous. Rock slides." We exchanged confused glances. "But we followed the trail from the hilltop," Kyle insisted. "No," Joseph said firmly. "That trail comes in from the west. You came from the east, through the hollows." "What are the hollows?" Megan asked. Joseph looked uncomfortable. "Bad place, old stories. You shouldn't have come that way." He hesitated, then added, "Be careful here. Don't go wandering at night. And whatever you do, don't follow if someone calls your name." With that cryptic warning, he walked away. That night, as we sat around our campfire, the strange events of the past 24 hours weighed heavily on us. "Maybe we should head back tomorrow," I suggested. "Take the regular trail out." Trevor looked disappointed but nodded. "Yeah, maybe that's best." I'll drink to that, Kyle said, raising his water bottle in a mock toast. Just then, we heard that singing again, the same high, clear voice from the night before, singing in that same unknown language. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the creek. "You guys hear that, right?" I whispered. They all nodded, faces tense in the firelight. "Let's ignore it," Megan suggested. "Go to bed and leave at first light." We doused the fire and retreated to our tents. I shared with Trevor while Kyle and Megan took the other tent. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. The singing continued on and off through the night, sometimes seeming to circle our campsite. I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I knew, Trevor was shaking me awake. "Kyle's gone," he said, his face ashen in the gray pre-dawn light. I scrambled out of the tent. Megan was standing by the cold fire pit, hugging herself against the morning chill. "I woke up and his sleeping bag was empty," she said, her voice trembling, unzipped from the inside. "Maybe he went to the bathroom?" I suggested. "His boots are still here," Trevor pointed out, "and his jacket." We called Kyle's name, softly at first, then with increasing urgency. There was no response. "We need to report this," Megan said. "Find the ranger station or whatever they have here." We split up. Trevor and I would search the immediate area while Megan went to find help in the village. As she walked away, I felt a pang of unease at separating, but it seemed like the most efficient plan. Trevor and I searched along the creek, calling Kyle's name despite Joseph's warning. The beautiful turquoise water that would normally have captivated us now seemed ominous. "Look," Trevor said suddenly, pointing to the far bank. "Isn't that Kyle's shirt?" A flash of the blue plaid that Kyle had been wearing the day before was visible caught on a bush across the creek. We waded across, the cold water numbing our legs. The shirt was indeed Kyle's, torn and muddy. And beyond it, leading into a dense thicket of cottonwood trees, was a trail of disturbed earth, as if something or someone had been dragged. "Kyle!" I shouted, pushing into the thicket. Trevor followed close behind. The drag marks led to the mouth of a small cave set into the canyon wall, partially hidden by the trees. Darkness yawned beyond the entrance. "We need flashlights," Trevor said. "I've got my phone," I replied, turning on the flashlight function. The beam seemed feeble against the absolute blackness of the cave. "Kyle," I called into the darkness, "are you in there?" A rustling sound came from within, followed by a voice that was almost, but not quite, Kyle's. "Guys, I'm here. Come in. I found something amazing." Trevor and I exchanged glances. Something wasn't right about Kyle's voice. It was too flat, too monotone. "Come on out, Kyle," Trevor called. "Megan's worried." A pause. Then, "I can't. You have to see this. Please, come in." Against my better judgment, I stepped into the cave, Trevor right behind me. The air inside was cold and damp with an underlying smell of decay. My phone's light revealed a narrow passage that curved away to the left. "Kyle," I called again. "Back here," came the response in that same wrong voice. "Just a little further." We followed the passage as it wound deeper into the rock. The ground beneath our feet was slick with moisture, making each step treacherous. After about 50 feet, the passage opened into a small chamber, and there was Kyle, standing with his back to us, facing the far wall. "Kyle, man, you scared the hell out of us," Trevor said, relief evident in his voice. "What are you doing in here?" Kyle turned slowly. In the dim light of my phone, his face looked strange. Too pale, his eyes too wide, his smile too fixed. "I found her," he said in that flat voice. "She's been waiting for you, Daniel." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about? Who's been waiting?" Instead of answering, Kyle stepped aside, revealing a crude drawing on the cave wall behind him. It depicted a tall, emaciated female figure with elongated limbs and a head that seemed too large for its body. Where the face should have been was only a blank oval. "La Hueca," Kyle said reverently. "The Hollow Woman. She's hungry." Before I could process what was happening, Kyle lunged at Trevor, moving with a speed and strength I'd never seen from him before. He slammed Trevor against the cave wall, his hands wrapping around my friend's throat. "Kyle, stop!" I shouted, grabbing his shoulder. When he turned to look at me, his eyes were completely black, pupil and white alike swallowed by darkness. I stumbled back as Trevor fought to break Kyle's grip. Somehow, Trevor managed to knee Kyle in the stomach, forcing him to let go. Kyle doubled over, making a strange keening sound that echoed off the cave walls. "Run!" Trevor gasped, pushing past me toward the entrance. We sprinted back along the passage, the sound of Kyle's inhuman wailing following us. As we burst out of the cave into the sunlight, we nearly collided with Megan, who was approaching with Joseph and 2 other men from the village. "What happened?" Megan demanded, taking in our terrified expressions. Between gasps for breath, we explained about finding Kyle in the cave, his strange behavior, and the drawing. Joseph's face had gone ashen. "La Hueca," he murmured, making a sign with his hand that I didn't recognize. "She has taken your friend." "What do you mean, taken?" Trevor demanded. "He's still in there." "That is not your friend anymore," one of the other men said grimly. "The body, yes, but inside." He shook his head. "We have to help him," I insisted. "There is a way," Joseph said slowly, "but it is dangerous, and there is no guarantee it will work." "Tell us," Megan said. According to Joseph, La Hueca, the Hollow Woman, was an ancient spirit that haunted the remote parts of the canyon. Legend held that she was once a shaman who had sought forbidden knowledge and been cursed as a result, transformed into a hungry spirit that fed on the essence of the living, leaving them hollow shells that she could control. "She grows stronger with each feeding," Joseph explained, "and she will not stop with your friend. She will use him to lure others." "How do we stop her?" I asked. "There is a ritual," Joseph said, "but we need certain items. Sacred water from Mooney Falls, red clay from the canyon walls, and something personal from your friend, something that held meaning for him." We split up to gather the necessary items. Megan and I hiked to Mooney Falls. Under normal circumstances, its 200-foot cascade would have been breathtaking, but we were too focused on our mission to appreciate the view. We filled a small bottle with water from the pool at the base of the falls, then collected red clay from a specific spot Joseph had described. Meanwhile, Trevor searched Kyle's belongings back at camp, eventually finding a small wooden medallion Kyle always wore on a leather cord around his neck, a gift from his late father, he'd once told us. By late afternoon, we reconvened with Joseph and several other villagers who had agreed to help. They had prepared a mixture of herbs and powders that gave off a pungent, acrid smell when burned. "We must return to the cave at sunset," Joseph instructed. "The barrier between worlds is thinnest then." "What exactly is the plan?" Megan asked, her scientific mind clearly struggling with the supernatural elements of our situation. "We will force La Hueca to release your friend's spirit," Joseph explained. "But be warned, she will fight, and she will use your friend's body to do it. You must be prepared for that." As the sun began to set, turning the canyon walls to gold and crimson, we made our way back to the cave. The narrow passage seemed even more oppressive than before, the air thick with dread. In the chamber where we'd found Kyle, everything was as we'd left it, except for one detail. The drawing on the wall had changed. The figure now appeared to be in motion, its elongated limbs stretched toward an unmistakable rendering of a human figure with a blank face. "Where's Kyle?" Trevor whispered. As if in answer, a scuffling sound came from a crevice to our right that I hadn't noticed before, and then Kyle emerged, moving in a strange, jerky fashion, as if his limbs weren't quite under his control. "Friends," he said in that wrong voice, "you came back. She's so pleased." Joseph began chanting in his native language, sprinkling the herbal mixture in a circle around us. 2 other villagers took up positions at the entrance to the chamber, holding bundles of smoking sage. Kyle, or the thing controlling him, hissed and backed away from the smoke. "Stop that," he snapped. his voice fluctuating between Kyle's normal tone and something much older, much colder. I uncapped the bottle of water from Mooney Falls and, following Joseph's earlier instructions, drew a line with it between Kyle and the cave drawing. Kyle screamed, a sound of pure rage that couldn't possibly have come from a human throat. "Now!" Joseph shouted over the inhuman noise. "The clay! Mark him!" Megan lunged forward with surprising speed, smearing the red clay across Kyle's forehead in a symbol Joseph had taught us. Kyle's body convulsed violently, and he fell to his knees. "The personal item," Joseph directed. Trevor stepped forward, holding out Kyle's wooden medallion. "Kyle," he said firmly, "this is yours. Your dad gave it to you. Remember who you are." Kyle's head snapped up, his completely black eyes fixing on the medallion. A look of confusion crossed his face. "Dad?" he whispered, and for a moment it sounded like the real Kyle. "That's right," Trevor encouraged. "Think about your dad. Think about us. We're your friends. We came here together, remember?" Kyle's face contorted in a battle of expressions: confusion, rage, recognition, pain, cycling too quickly to track. He clutched his head and began to rock back and forth. Joseph's chanting grew more intense. The air in the cave seemed to thicken and vibrate with unseen energy. The drawing on the wall began to leak a black, tar-like substance that ran down the rock face like tears. "She's weakening," Joseph said between chants. "Keep going." "Kyle," I said, kneeling in front of my friend, "come back to us. Fight her." Kyle looked up at me, and for an instant I saw recognition in his eyes, one moment of clarity in which the real Kyle surfaced. Then he lunged at me with startling speed, hands going for my throat. I fell backward, Kyle on top of me, his fingers closing around my windpipe. His face was inches from mine, a rictus of hatred that belonged to something ancient and malevolent rather than my friend. "Daniel!" Megan screamed. Through my darkening vision, I saw Trevor move. He had a rock in his hand, a large one, and before I could process what was happening, he brought it down hard on the back of Kyle's head. Kyle collapsed on top of me, unconscious or worse. I shoved him off, gasping for air. "What did you do?" I wheezed. "Saved your life," Trevor replied, face grim. "Sorry, Kyle," he added, looking down at our friend's still form. Joseph rushed to Kyle's side, checking for a pulse. "He lives," he confirmed, "but we must complete the ritual quickly." While I was still trying to catch my breath, Joseph placed the wooden medallion on Kyle's chest, then drew more symbols on his forehead and hands with the red clay. The chanting resumed, now joined by all the villagers present. The black substance on the wall began to move, coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape that seemed to pull itself out of the rock face. It hovered there, a three-dimensional shadow with too many limbs and a head that was just a blank oval. "La Hueca," Joseph breathed. "She comes." The shadow figure drifted toward Kyle's unconscious form. Instinctively, I moved to shield my friend, but Joseph held me back. "No," he warned. "This is the separation. It must happen." The shadow descended on Kyle, seeming to seep into his skin. His body arched off the ground, mouth open in a silent scream. Then, just as suddenly, the shadow pulled back, dragging what looked like a faint, luminous version of Kyle with it. "His soul," Megan whispered in horror. "It's taking his soul." "No!" Trevor lunged forward, grabbing the wooden medallion from Kyle's chest. He thrust it into the midst of the struggle between the shadow and Kyle's luminous essence. There was a sound like glass breaking, though nothing visible had shattered, and a shock wave of energy threw us all to the ground. When I managed to sit up, dazed, the shadow was gone. The drawing on the wall had reverted to simple lines of red ochre that might have been thousands of years old. And Kyle was stirring, groaning in pain. "My head," he mumbled, reaching up to touch the spot where Trevor had struck him. "What the hell happened?" We got Kyle out of the cave and back to camp, where we spent a tense night keeping watch and shifts. Kyle claimed to have no memory of anything after going to sleep the night before. The last thing he remembered was hearing someone call his name, a voice that sounded exactly like his mother's, though she had died when he was a teenager. "It kept calling me," he said, hands trembling around a cup of hot tea Megan had prepared. "I couldn't ignore it." The next morning, we packed up and left Supai, taking the main trail back up to Hualapai Hilltop. Joseph accompanied us as far as the village boundary. "La Hueca will be weakened for now," he told us quietly, "but not destroyed. Never destroyed. She will find another vessel, another victim. It is her way." "Why did she target us?" I asked. Joseph gave me a long look. "You took the wrong trail. You entered her domain. But more than that." He hesitated. "She is drawn to certain souls. Souls with emptiness inside them already. Grief, loneliness, regret." I thought about Kyle, who had never fully processed his father's death. About Megan's recent breakup from a 5-year relationship. About Trevor's estrangement from his family. About my own emptiness since Julia left me. "Be careful," Joseph warned as we prepared to leave. "She knows you now, all of you, and she is patient." The hike out of the canyon was brutal. 8 miles of steep switchbacks under the relentless Arizona sun. By the time we reached the top, we were exhausted, dehydrated, and silent, each lost in our own thoughts. The drive back to Phoenix passed in a blur. We dropped Kyle at the hospital, concocting a story about a fall on the trail to explain his head injury. Trevor and Megan went their separate ways with brief, awkward goodbyes. The easy camaraderie we'd shared at work seemed shattered beyond repair. I returned to my empty apartment, took the longest shower of my life, and fell into bed. But sleep brought no relief. In my dreams, I walk a narrow trail through a canyon I've never seen before. Ahead of me, a figure with 2 long limbs and a blank face beckons. Behind me, I hear the voices of my friends calling my name. When I look back, they're standing there. Trevor, Megan, Kyle, but their faces are smooth ovals of skin without features. And they're singing. A high, clear melody in a language I don't recognize but somehow understand. "Come to us, Daniel. We've been waiting for you. There's a hollow inside you that needs filling." I wake, gasping, my throat raw as if I've been screaming. And somewhere in the darkness of my room, just for a moment, I think I see a tall, thin silhouette with a featureless face, watching. That was 3 weeks ago. I've called in sick to work every day since. I don't answer when Trevor or Megan call. I've blocked Kyle's number entirely, because sometimes when I'm on the phone, I hear that singing in the background. And sometimes when they text, there are words in another language mixed in with the English. Words I somehow understand despite never having learned them. Words that say, "We miss you, Daniel. We're coming for you. La Hueca is hungry." I've barricaded my door, covered all the mirrors, stuffed towels under every crack where shadows might slip through, but it won't matter. She found her way into Kyle in a canyon hundreds of miles from here. And now she knows where I live. Last night I woke to find my bathroom mirror uncovered, though I know I taped a sheet over it before going to bed. In the glass, my reflection stared back at me, but its eyes were completely black, and behind it stood 3 featureless figures. As I watched, frozen in terror, my reflection smiled with too many teeth and whispered, "We're already inside you, Daniel. We've always been inside you." I'm leaving Arizona tomorrow, driving as far as I can get. Maybe it will be enough, but I doubt it, because the hollows aren't just in Havasupai. The hollows are everywhere. There's emptiness. And the emptiness is in us all. If you're reading this, stay away from Havasu Canyon. Stay away from narrow trails that don't appear on maps. And if you ever hear someone call your name in a voice you know is impossible, your dead mother, your distant lover, your estranged friend, for God's sake, don't answer, don't follow, and whatever you do, don't look back. Because she'll be there, waiting, her face a blank canvas ready to wear yours. And once she knows your name, you'll never escape the hollows.